They once called them gods, beings who shaped mountains, tamed floods, and walked among mortals as luminous figures of power and wisdom. But what if they weren't gods at all? What if the myths that built civilizations were, in truth, distorted memories of something far older, the survivors of a world erased by time? Long before recorded history, long before the Sumerians carved their tablets, or the Egyptians raised their stones, Earth may have hosted a civilization that vanished, not in war or conquest, but in silence. Their traces might not lie in ruins or relics, but in myths, in inexplicable monuments, in genetic whispers embedded in us. Tonight, as the tides of deep time return to memory, we ask, could the gods of old have been the last voices of the first people? Those who endured the great cataclysms, carrying fragments of forgotten science across continents, reshaping humanity's dawn beneath the veil of divinity? This is Secrets Earth. If this story finds you somewhere quiet tonight, like, subscribe and share where in the world you're listening from. The journey begins in the ruins before history, where memory and myth first met. The night sky above the cradle of civilization glows faintly, as if it remembers. Beneath that same dome of stars, tens of thousands of years ago, small bands of humans once stared upward, wondering who or what had shaped the world. The constellations were their scriptures, the movements of light across blackness their first libraries. Yet what if they were not just inventing gods, but remembering them? When archaeologists uncovered the megalithic pillars of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, dated to around 9600 BCE, they found something that didn't fit the timeline of human development. Complex architecture, astronomical alignment, stone carvings of extinct animals, all emerging at a time when humans were thought to be simple hunter-gatherers. It was as if civilization had appeared overnight, already mature, already looking to the stars. Some scholars called it the First Temple. Others quietly wondered, who taught them how to build it? Every layer of sediment around those stones tells a deeper story, a climate in chaos, melting glaciers, rising seas. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth staggered under what scientists call the Younger Dryas impact event, a sudden cooling, perhaps triggered by a comet or fragments striking the northern ice sheets. The world burned, then froze, then flooded. Species vanished, oceans rose, and humanity, if it survived at all, had to begin again. Imagine a civilization before that cataclysm, one advanced not in steel or silicon, but in a mastery of stone, sky, and rhythm, a culture woven into nature's fabric so deeply that its fall would seem divine punishment, its survivors gods. When the floods came, the lowlands drowned. Coastal cities, fertile plains, entire ecosystems disappeared beneath the waves. Those who lived at higher ground might have watched their world collapse into ocean, carrying nothing but memory and the will to rebuild. In myths from every corner of the globe, echoes of this event persist. The Sumerians spoke of the gods who descended after a great flood, bringing order to chaos. The Egyptians told of the followers of Horus, a mysterious race who ruled before the first pharaohs. The Greeks remembered Atlantis, not as fantasy, but as tragedy. The Aztecs, the Hopi, the Maori, the Dogon of Mali, all tell stories of skyborn teachers who emerged from the ruins of a drowned world to guide humanity anew. Modern science may dismiss these as archetypal dreams, humanity's shared fear of annihilation and rebirth. Yet the timing, the patterns, the geography align too neatly to ignore. Around the time Göbekli Tepe rose, glaciers were retreating, sea levels rising, coastlines shifting. Entire continents were being redrawn. What if those myths were not inventions but records, distorted by millennia, yet grounded in truth? The survivors of such a cataclysm would appear supernatural to those they found. Imagine a remnant of that lost civilization stumbling upon bands of post-catastrophe humans, people who had forgotten agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, their memories scorched by fire and famine. The survivors would seem luminous, their knowledge of stars, seasons, and stone indistinguishable from magic. Over generations their names would fade, their technologies become rituals, their symbols turn to myths. The gods would be born. The ruins we now study might not be the beginnings of civilization, but its recovery. Each temple, each monolith, a reconstruction of memory. The alignment of megaliths with solstices and equinoxes, not primitive superstition, but desperate attempts to re-establish time itself, to fix the rhythm of the world after it had been broken. When the Earth's axis shifted slightly, when seasons changed abruptly, perhaps the survivors sought to map the sky again, to remember how it once moved. In that sense, the first temples may have been observatories not of faith, but of survival, places where the few who remembered taught the many how to read the heavens once more. Their stories, encoded in carvings of animals, serpents, and celestial beings, may be the fossilized language of a lost epoch. Archaeologists often describe early Neolithic art as symbolic expression, but symbols are memory. The vulture stone at Göbekli Tepe, with its depiction of a headless man beneath celestial creatures, could mark not a myth, but an event, a memory of cosmic impact, a death of worlds. When the dust cleared, when the stars returned, humanity might have mistaken those who endured for gods descending from the sky, when in truth they were simply climbing out of the ruins. And so the stories spread, reshaped by tongues and continents. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamia, the Apkallu sages rising from the waters, the Egyptian Thoth, keeper of wisdom after the flood, the Greek Prometheus stealing fire from the heavens. Different faces, one lineage. Survivors teaching children of a world that once was. But where did these survivors go when their work was done? The ancient texts speak of their departure, back to the heavens or into the earth or across the sea. Maybe they left because they had seen this pattern before. Rise, fall, forget. Or maybe they simply faded, absorbed into the bloodlines of those they saved. If the gods of old were survivors, their legacy would not be in temples or tombs, but in us, in the architecture of our minds, in the instinct to look upward and remember something we cannot name. The stars still whisper the same alignments they once marked. The earth still bears scars of the ice and fire that reshaped it. Somewhere buried beneath silt and myth might lie the proof, not of gods, but of a civilization reborn from its own ashes. And as the wind passes through the stones of Göbekli Tepe tonight, it sounds almost like a voice, ancient, patient, waiting for someone to listen long enough to remember. In the next moment of silence, the story will descend deeper, into the ruins below the ocean, where the first cities of the forgotten might still dream beneath the waves. Beneath the restless oceans that now define our continents, there are scars invisible to the naked eye, drowned valleys, ancient riverbeds, and terraces where sunlight once fell upon grass and stone. When the last ice age ended, more than 10 million square miles of land vanished under rising seas. The coastlines humanity once called home are now hundreds of meters below the surface, and in those shadowed depths, archaeologists are finding traces that defy what we thought we knew about the birth of civilization. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Kambat, sonar scans once revealed vast geometric patterns, rectangles and grids buried beneath layers of sediment. Marine archaeologists diving there found pottery fragments, tools, even fossilized bones, carbon dated to around 9,000 years before our era. If those dates are true, the site predates the Sumerians by millennia. Yet what's more haunting than the artifacts themselves is the silence surrounding them. The structures lie too deep, too eroded to excavate safely. Officially, they are inconclusive, but to some, they are whispers of the first drowned world, a city erased by the flood the ancients could never forget. Similar stories emerge elsewhere. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, massive stone terraces descend into the blue like a sunken citadel. Some geologists claim it's a natural formation sculpted by waves. Others see deliberate symmetry, steps too even, corners too sharp. Marine archaeologist Masaki Kimura once described it as the oldest known structure on Earth, possibly older than Göbekli Tepe itself. Whether shaped by human hands or by nature imitating them, the monument stands as a mirror to our uncertainty, where the line between myth and memory begins to blur. The sea, for all its beauty, is an unforgiving archive. Salt erases, pressure crushes, currents scatter. But every so often something endures. Off the Bahamas, explorers found the so-called Bimini Road, a trail of massive limestone blocks forming a near-straight path under shallow water. For decades, it fueled speculation about Atlantis, the lost city described by Plato. Geologists dismiss it as natural beach rock fractured by tides. Yet when viewed from above, the stones appear arranged with a precision that seems to resist coincidence. Perhaps the truth is simpler, that human hands completed what nature began, adapting the landscape as the sea slowly reclaimed it. If the gods of old were survivors, the sea would have been their greatest adversary, and their greatest grave. As the planet warmed and the glaciers collapsed, global sea levels rose by more than 120 meters, submerging entire ecosystems. The survivors would have been forced to retreat inland, abandoning ports, cities, and temples. They might have carried with them fragments of knowledge, how to measure the stars, how to align stone with the sun's path, how to remember through geometry what words could not preserve. Across ancient mythologies, water holds the same paradox, both destroyer and deliverer. In the Mesopotamian flood epic, Utnapishtim survives the deluge and is granted immortality. In the Bible, Noah preserves life through obedience. In Hindu cosmology, Manu escapes the flood with the help of a divine fish. The message is consistent. The flood cleanses, but it also transmits. It carries something, wisdom, seed, memory, into a new age. If these myths reflect memory rather than metaphor, then water becomes not just symbol, but evidence of transmission, a geological messenger bearing fragments of a civilization that refused to vanish. Archaeology has begun to hint at this continuity. In South America, the city of Tiwanaku sits at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. Yet its megalithic blocks show erosion patterns suggesting they were once carved close to sea level. The alignment of its structures corresponds not to the current equinoxes but to those of an earlier axial tilt, as if the builders were mapping a sky that no longer exists. Such anomalies are not isolated. They recur in ancient sites from Peru to Egypt to Cambodia. Each one seems to preserve a memory of the heavens as they once were. How could unconnected peoples separated by oceans carve temples aligned to the same stars, share flood myths of similar cadence, and construct megaliths guided by identical astronomical principles? Coincidence may explain patterns, but not precision. It is as though humanity awoke one morning with collective amnesia, rebuilding fragments of a lost language written in stone. The survivors might have travelled far and wide, carrying not just tools but maps of the heavens, a stellar blueprint through which the sky itself became a library. If this theory is true, then the gods of old were not rulers, but memory keepers. They carried what little remained of a civilization extinguished by the sea, encoding knowledge into myth, so that even when the material world perished, the story could survive in ritual, in alignment, in the rhythm of the stars. The sea's depths are still unexplored, more unknown than the surface of Mars. In recent decades, submersible drones have begun scanning drowned coastlines, uncovering terraces, causeways, and pillar-like anomalies stretching across the Atlantic shelf. Some are natural, others, the divers say, feel made. But what if these ruins were only the outer gardens of a civilization whose heart lies deeper still, beneath miles of sediment and time? The ocean floor moves, shifts, erases, but occasionally it reveals. Perhaps one day, a storm will churn up a coastline and expose a shard of an ancient wall, an inscription weathered into unreadable geometry. Perhaps somewhere off the Azores or beneath the Sunda Shelf, sonar will return an image too symmetrical to ignore, and the debate will begin anew. Until then, the gods remain suspended between story and science, waiting for their cities to surface again. In a way, we are still answering their call. Every archaeological dive, every sonar map, every fragment retrieved from the seabed is a whisper of recognition, as though we are trying to complete a sentence that began long before us. The gods may have been human after all, but their survival, their memory, their persistence across millennia suggests something more enduring than flesh. When the first survivors stepped ashore from their flooded world, they must have looked back at the ocean, their past now lost beneath it, and sworn never to forget. And perhaps that vow became civilization itself, for in the shimmering dark beneath the waves the ocean still hides its ancient cities, and above, the stars still trace the same patterns those forgotten builders once followed. The question is not whether the first civilization existed, but whether we are ready to remember it when it finally rises again. As the tide withdraws from a forgotten shore, the story continues inland, toward the mountains where the survivors built their second world, and the gods began to teach humanity how to dream again. The mountains rose like ancient witnesses, jagged spines of stone where the air thinned and time slowed. After the floods receded, this is where the survivors would have gone, inland, upward, to the places the waters could not reach. In nearly every mythology, the gods emerge from high places, the peaks where heaven and earth meet. Olympus in Greece, Meru in India, Sinai in the Levant, and Ararat in Armenia. Across continents, the divine descends through mountain mist. Yet what if these heights were not chosen for their holiness, but for their memory? What if the first survivors of the deluge built upward to escape the sea that had swallowed their past? When archaeologists study the earliest highland civilizations, they find a pattern of deliberate ascent. Settlements appear not along fertile rivers, as would be expected, but upon plateaus and terraces. The Andes, the Zagros, the Caucasus, the Ethiopian highlands, all became homes to people who seemed to already know how to shape stone, cultivate terraces, and chart the sky. It is as though humanity's first architects were rebuilding from memory rather than invention. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, the bearded god who came from the waters after the Great Flood, teaching agriculture and astronomy before vanishing into the Pacific. In Mesopotamia, Enki emerged from the abyss to bring knowledge to humankind. In the Himalayas, traditions of Shambhala describe a hidden kingdom in the mountains, a place where ancient wisdom is preserved for when the world forgets. All these tales share the same motif. After the waters came, the teachers appeared. In the thin air of the Andes, the ruins of Pumapunku lie scattered like shattered blueprints. Massive stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are cut with a precision that modern engineers still puzzle over. The H-shaped blocks interlock like parts of a machine, with grooves and joints too exact for primitive tools. Conventional archaeology attributes this to the Tiwanaku culture around 500 CE. Yet the local Aymara myths speak of something older, a time when the world was young and the gods walked with men. They say the stones moved by sound, by resonance, as if the builders knew how to command vibration itself. Sound, that invisible architecture of the world, is older than language. Modern researchers studying ancient temples have discovered something remarkable. Many megalithic chambers resonate at frequencies that affect the human body, even the brain. At Newgrange in Ireland, a tone of 110 Hz amplifies within the stone passage, matching the natural frequency of the male voice. In the Great Pyramid, low-frequency hums vibrate through the granite sarcophagus chamber. At Tiwanaku and Göbekli Tepe, similar acoustics create an almost hypnotic reverberation. Were these accidental or deliberate attempts to recreate a lost science, one where sound, structure, and consciousness were interwoven? If the survivors of the first civilization carried knowledge of vibration and resonance, perhaps it was not mystical at all. Sound waves, after all, are energy, capable of shaping sand into patterns, moving matter at the right frequencies, even affecting water molecules. A civilization attuned to nature's frequencies could have built with precision beyond our comprehension, not through machinery, but through harmony. When later generations witnessed such mastery, they would describe it in the only terms they knew, as divine power. The gods spoke, and the stones obeyed. The same principles may have guided the alignment of sacred sites across the globe. Mountaintop observatories, pyramids, ziggurats, and stone circles often resonate not only with sound, but with the sky. Many align perfectly with solar solstices, lunar nodes, or specific constellations. This precision suggests not random reverence, but astronomical intent. From these high places, the survivors may have charted the heavens to measure time, to restore the lost calendar after the Earth's orbit and tilt were disrupted by catastrophe. Even myths reflect this effort to rebuild cosmic order. In Egypt, the sky goddess Nut swallows the sun each night and gives birth to it at dawn, a poetic memory of recalibrating day and night. In the Andes, Inti the sun god rises from the eastern horizon marked by temples carved into rock. In Sumer, the heavens were divided into 12 houses. The zodiac, an echo of the celestial map the survivors may have used to re-anchor their sense of eternity. If these mountaintop temples were the first laboratories of the new world, then their priests were scientists cloaked in myth. The rituals that followed, chanting, alignment, offerings, may have originated as encoded instructions, to remember not just stories but geometry, frequency, astronomy. Over millennia the meaning decayed, leaving only religion behind. The gods then were not omnipotent beings, but remnants of a scientific tradition so advanced and so ancient that its survival required myth to conceal it. When their knowledge was too complex to express through words, they turned to symbols, serpents representing energy flow, circles marking celestial cycles, mountains as the axis between earth and sky. These symbols recur across continents as if drawn from a shared lexicon. And perhaps they were. Genetic studies suggest that after the Younger Dryas cataclysm, small populations spread outward from several highland refuges. They carried more than genes. They carried stories, encoded in myth, that preserved the memory of those who came before. By the time they reached the valleys again, generations later, their ancestors' mastery had become legend. They no longer remembered how the stones once sang, only that the gods had built them. Standing among the ruins of Puma Punku today, one can feel a silence that seems deliberate, almost protective. The precision of the stones, their symmetry and orientation, suggest not chaos but a lost design. If we could decode it, perhaps it would reveal a mathematics written in resonance rather than numbers, an inheritance from a civilization that measured the world through sound and light. And maybe, high in these mountains, that knowledge still lingers, not in books or inscriptions, but in the frequency of the wind through stone corridors, the hum of granite when touched by sun. A song written for those patient enough to listen. For the survivors of the first civilization, the mountains were both refuge and monument, places where memory could endure even if the seas rose again. But survival was not enough. To rebuild, they would have to pass on their knowledge, to teach the scattered tribes below. That is where the myth of the gods truly began, not in their power, but in their teaching. In the next echo of history, we follow those teachers as they descend from their mountains, carrying with them the fire of forgotten science, and the promise that civilization could begin again. They came down from the mountains like figures stepping out of a dream, strangers wrapped in woven hides, eyes glinting with the knowledge of the stars. To the tribes scattered across the new world, they were the bringers of light, the speakers of fire, the builders of the first gardens. Every mythology remembers them differently, but their essence remains the same, the gods who descended to teach. In Sumer, they were the Anunnaki, beings of immense wisdom who came from heaven to earth to restore order after chaos. In Egypt, Thoth and Osiris brought law and cultivation to the Nile. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, emerged from the sea to teach mathematics, architecture, and astronomy. Even in the Pacific Islands, the gods are said to have arrived by canoe from lands swallowed by the ocean. Different names, same pattern. Visitors who possessed knowledge that should have taken millennia to evolve yet appeared suddenly fully formed. Archaeologists faced with these parallels often attribute them to cultural diffusion, the way ideas spread through trade or migration. But what if the source of those ideas was not trade, but memory? The survivors of the cataclysm, the last inheritors of a drowned civilization, moving outward, teaching the fragments of what they once knew. Consider the sudden emergence of agriculture around 10,000 BCE. Before this point, humanity lived as foragers for nearly 2 million years. Then, almost simultaneously across distant regions, the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River, the Andes, people began to domesticate plants and animals. Wheat, barley, rice, maize, llamas, each became part of humanity's new partnership with the land. The coincidence is staggering. Was it chance or instruction? Archaeobotanists studying early domestication note that it required sophisticated understanding of genetics, timing, and irrigation. Ancient seeds show signs of deliberate hybridization, an awareness of selective breeding far beyond the presumed knowledge of Neolithic farmers. The same applies to architecture. The transition from nomadic huts to monumental stonework occurred too fast to be evolutionary. It was as if someone lit a torch in the dark and the world suddenly remembered how to build. The myths mirror this awakening. The Sumerian god Enki taught humans how to irrigate the desert. In Egypt, Osiris brought grain. In the Andes, Viracocha taught terrace farming. The Dogon of Mali, whose oral traditions mention beings from the star Sirius, speak of amphibious teachers who gave them knowledge of the cosmos. To modern ears, these sound like fantasies, but if those gods were survivors, astronomers, engineers, scientists, their deeds would appear miraculous to a recovering humanity. Imagine the first encounter. Tribes gathered along a riverbank, watching figures descend from the hills carrying symbols carved in stone, tools of metal or crystal, maps of the heavens. To a people rebuilding from ash, these were divine messengers. Yet behind the myths of thunder and flame might have been the slow work of teaching. How to read the stars, how to measure seasons, how to build with purpose. Even language itself may have been their gift. Linguists have long puzzled over the Sumerian language, the earliest known written tongue, with no discernible ancestor. Its structure is complex, synthetic, and seemingly artificial. Could it be a preserved relic of a pre-cataclysmic language, one designed for precision rather than poetry? Later scripts, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Indus symbols, Linear A, may all trace back to this lost linguistic seed. Over centuries, the survivors' teachings would evolve into institutions, temples, calendars, priesthoods. The memory of their presence would grow distant, transformed from mentorship into mythology. The gods who once taught now ruled, their words became commandments, their technologies rituals. And when those first teachers died, their tombs became holy ground. But beneath the veneer of divinity, traces of real knowledge remain. The megaliths of Egypt, for instance, embody mathematical constants not formally defined until modern times. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode the ratio of Earth's circumference to its radius, the value of pi, and the golden mean, all embedded in a monument supposedly built with copper tools and manpower alone. Similar patterns appear in ancient sites worldwide. Stonehenge encodes lunar cycles. Teotihuacan mirrors the orbital ratio of Venus. Angkor Wat aligns to the precession of the equinoxes. These are not coincidences of superstition. They are signatures, fingerprints of a knowledge passed down by those who remembered. The myth of fire may itself be metaphor for this transmission. In every culture, fire symbolizes both creation and theft, from Prometheus stealing flame from the gods to Maui snatching it from the underworld. Fire is knowledge, the forbidden spark that transforms chaos into order. And so, when the survivors gave light to humanity, they gave the very thing that once destroyed their world. Perhaps they knew that to survive again, humanity would have to balance creation with restraint. As civilization spread, the gods began to fade. Their teachings became traditions, their science cloaked in ceremony. In time, each culture claimed the divine as its own, a pantheon for every region, a myth for every tongue. Yet across the globe, their symbols remained consistent. Serpents, suns, birds, eyes, spirals. These motifs persist not by chance, but because they encode the same universal story, one of survival, remembrance, and rebirth. Modern scholars might argue that such parallels arise from the shared human psyche, Jung's collective unconscious, archetypes born from our biology. But perhaps the truth is more literal. Perhaps the same memories survived because they were taught by the same people. The scattered remnants of the first civilization, carrying their language of myth across continents like a sacred code. What we call mythology may, in truth, be the fossilized history of a knowledge transfer, a poetic archive preserving fragments of science in allegory. The gods were not beyond humanity. They were what humanity once was, and might become again. Their wisdom was not revelation, but remembrance. And if we listen carefully through the static of time, the message they left us is still clear. Knowledge must serve life, or it will destroy it again. The flood was not only a punishment, but a warning, one we seem fated to forget. As the last of those ancient teachers vanished into legend, their temples became silent. But somewhere, hidden in stone, they left messages for those who would come after, maps not of territory, but of time. In the next chapter of this forgotten story, we descend into those temples, into the coded geometry and strange acoustics where the gods inscribed their final warning before they disappeared once more into the dark. Deep within the stone temples the gods left behind, geometry and light merge into something that feels alive. At first glance, these ancient sanctuaries seem inert, vast blocks of limestone, basalt, or granite, arranged in solemn stillness. But when sunlight passes through a narrow slit at a precise hour, when shadows crawl across the walls in measured rhythm, one realizes these temples were not merely places of worship. They were instruments, devices calibrated to time, sound, and celestial movement. The ancients did not build randomly. The Temple of Karnak aligns with the rising sun at the winter solstice. At Chichen Itza, the shadow of a serpent slithers down the pyramid steps only twice each year, marking the equinox. At Angkor Wat, dawn breaks directly over its central tower during the spring equinox, illuminating corridors filled with intricate astronomical reliefs. These were calendars carved in stone, maps of the heavens that could measure time more precisely than any clock of the Middle Ages. Modern archaeology explains these alignments as symbolic, tributes to solar deities, celebrations of fertility or harvest. Yet the precision suggests more than symbolism. It implies engineering, mathematical awareness of the Earth's tilt, orbit, and axial precession. To achieve such accuracy, builders needed centuries of observation, tools to mark celestial arcs, and a scientific framework to interpret them. Who taught them this? How did they know where to begin? Inside many temples, the same pattern reappears. Geometry nested within geometry. Circles inscribed in squares. Squares aligned to stars. Corridors tuned to acoustic frequencies. When sound is made within these spaces, a chant, a drum beat, even a whisper, it reverberates in perfect harmonic resonance. Archaeologists call this acoustic intentionality. Ancient architects seem to have designed these temples as resonant chambers, capable of amplifying sound at frequencies that induce calm, trance, or euphoria. In the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, a subterranean temple over 5,000 years old, archaeologists discovered that a man's voice at 110 Hz triggers a standing wave within the chamber, causing the entire space to vibrate. The effect on the human body is measurable. The sound alters brainwave activity, lowering heart rate and creating a sensation of floating. Was this deliberate? And if so, what did the builders know about the interaction between vibration and consciousness? If the gods were survivors, their temples might have been tools to preserve more than memory. They were machines for remembering. By combining light, sound, and geometry, they encoded knowledge into experience itself. A person standing within such a temple would feel harmony, rhythm, coherence, the same principles that govern the cosmos. In this sense, to worship was to align oneself with the structure of reality. Modern science now echoes what those ancients may have known intuitively. The universe is vibration. From the smallest quark to the largest galaxy, everything oscillates. Matter is frozen music. The frequencies that shape atomic structures are not so different from those that shape sound waves. What the ancients may have achieved then was an architecture of resonance. Temples built not to please gods, but to tune human consciousness to the frequency of the world. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. Within its limestone shell, every chamber resonates at precise harmonic intervals. Researchers in 2020 discovered that its cavities amplify specific electromagnetic frequencies, especially those within the range of Earth's natural Schumann resonance, around 7.83 Hz. This frequency coincides with the brain's alpha waves, the state between wakefulness and meditation. Coincidence or inheritance? If the survivors of the first civilization had learned how to use resonance to stabilize emotion, memory, or even matter, then their temples were continuity devices, bridges between worlds. When their civilization fell, these sites became their archive. Later generations could no longer decode the physics, so they turned the experience into myth. The voice of the gods echoing through stone, the sun reborn at dawn, the world balanced by ritual. The sacred had once been scientific. Inscriptions across Egypt hint at this lost understanding. The ancient texts speak of the house of eternity and the horizon of light, temples where the gods sang the world into being. The concept of creation through sound, Heka, was not metaphor but cosmology. The priests were not magicians, They were curators of frequency, guardians of the vibrations that bound the universe together. Other cultures preserved the same idea. In India, Om was said to be the sound that created reality. In China, the imperial bells of the Zhou dynasty were tuned to mirror the planetary harmonics. In the Andes, panpipes and conch shells were used in rituals aligned with the solstice sunrise. All of these fragments may trace back to a single origin, a civilization that understood resonance as both science and spirituality, long before those words diverged. What we call religion, then, may have been the afterimage of technology, knowledge too subtle to survive translation. The priests of later ages inherited the temples but not the equations. They remembered the form but not the function. And so the ritual replaced the reason, myth replaced measurement. Humanity remembered the song but forgot the tuning. Today, archaeologists sift through fragments, quartz blocks charged by sunlight, underground chambers with acoustic nodes, altars shaped like waveforms. Each discovery adds to a pattern that feels increasingly intentional, as though ancient builders were leaving messages for a future age, for us. Perhaps they knew this knowledge would fade, and that one day their descendants would rediscover it, not through myth, but through science reborn. For if the gods were once human, then the divine is not above us but within us, in our capacity to create, to understand, to harmonize. The temples remind us that the human mind is also a resonant chamber, capable of tuning itself to the frequencies of the universe. And maybe that is the real inheritance of the first civilization, not their monuments, but their awareness that consciousness itself is the ultimate instrument. As the light fades across the silent stones of Karnak, the shadows lengthen like the arms of forgotten giants reaching toward the stars. Somewhere in that twilight hum, between echo and silence, one can almost hear it, the song of a world that once remembered its own rhythm. Next, the story descends deeper into time, into the earth itself, where those ancient architects may have hidden their last experiment, the forgotten energy they harnessed beneath the ground and the reason it was lost. Beneath the earth, where sunlight fades into stone and silence, the air carries a different kind of memory. The ancients called these places the womb of the world. Modern explorers call them tunnels, caverns, catacombs. But to the first civilization, they were more than shelters. They were vaults, repositories of knowledge, machines buried in the planet's veins, powered by what they understood best, the earth itself. All across the world, from the Andes to the Himalayas, from Cappadocia to Egypt, vast networks of underground chambers stretch farther than any simple purpose can explain. In Turkey, the city of Derinkuyu plunges over 18 stories deep, with ventilation shafts, wells, and stone doors that could seal entire populations underground for months. Archaeologists believe it sheltered 30,000 people. But from what? War, the flood, or something deeper still, an awareness that catastrophe would come again, and the only way to survive was to descend. What if these were not just refuges but laboratories, places where the survivors of the first civilization harnessed geothermal power, studied magnetism, and preserved their knowledge in ways that could endure when surface structures perished? Recent geological studies reveal that many ancient sites sit atop fault lines, or areas rich in quartz, granite, and magnetic minerals, materials known to generate and store energy. Ancient engineers may not have understood electricity in modern terms, but they might have known the earth hummed with invisible forces, forces they could capture and transform. In Egypt, the mysterious Serapeum of Saqqara houses dozens of granite sarcophagi weighing over 70 tons each, carved with impossible precision. They rest within tunnels cut through solid bedrock. No hieroglyphs describe their builders. Some archaeologists believe they held sacred bulls, symbols of strength, but others, studying their resonance and the crystalline structure of the granite, suspect something stranger. The boxes are tuned, each one amplifying sound waves like enormous speakers. Were these chambers part of a forgotten energy system, where sound and stone interacted to channel power from the Earth's crust? In South America, similar anomalies appear. Beneath Sacsayhuaman, near Cusco, tunnels run for miles, carved into rock as if melted rather than chiseled. Local Quechua legends say these passages once connected to a subterranean city. the resting place of the gods. Scientists dismiss this as myth, yet magnetic anomalies in the area suggest that the rock itself was altered by intense heat, possibly plasma or resonance technology unknown to us. Across the world, petroglyphs show spirals, concentric circles, and serpentine patterns, symbols of energy flow, perhaps echoing a science that described the planet as alive. Even in modern physics, the Earth's magnetic field is known to pulse like a heartbeat, oscillating in cycles that affect climate, animal migration, even human emotion. The ancients may have sensed this rhythm long before it was measurable. By carving chambers into fault lines or constructing with magnetically charged stone, they might have been tapping into a natural feedback between planet and consciousness. The underworld was not a place of death, but of communion, where humans could hear the song of the planet directly. In mythology, the descent into the underworld always marks transformation. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, descends through 7 gates to confront her shadow self. The Greeks told of Orpheus entering Hades to retrieve lost love. The Egyptians believed the sun itself travelled beneath the earth each night, gathering strength for dawn. These stories may be poetic memories of real journeys, initiations performed within the earth's chambers, where vibration, darkness, and silence induce states of altered perception. To walk beneath the world was to remember its pulse. In the ruins of the Hippogem, acoustic engineers found frequencies that trigger theta waves in the human brain, patterns associated with deep meditation and visionary experience. Those who entered these spaces might have felt themselves dissolve, perceiving geometry and light within the dark. What priests later called visions of gods could have been neurological phenomena, ancient humanity's earliest exploration of consciousness. If the first civilization understood this, that mind and planet were one, then their underground networks were more than refuges or temples. They were extensions of thought, instruments for tuning the collective psyche. When disaster struck, the survivors would retreat below, not only to escape destruction, but to preserve balance, to keep humanity's resonance aligned with Earth's. But something changed. Whether through overuse, imbalance, or interference, the harmony broke. Legends from every continent speak of a time when the Earth roared, when fire burst from the ground and skies turned red. The Hopi call it the time of purification. Hindu scriptures call it pralaya. The Norse knew it as Ragnarok, the breaking of worlds. Perhaps the survivors' experiments in energy and resonance went too far. Perhaps their knowledge, meant to heal, destabilized the fragile balance of the planet. And so they sealed their vaults. They carved warnings into stone, serpents coiled around the earth, eyes within pyramids, suns swallowed by darkness. Symbols we still misinterpret as religious art may have been literal instructions, markers of the dangers that arise when harmony becomes control. Today, fragments of these warnings remain. The Schumann resonance fluctuates as our own technology fills the atmosphere with noise. We build machines that mimic what the ancients may have already mastered, from resonant frequencies in medical imaging to vibration-based levitation experiments. Yet we pursue them without the reverence those first survivors carried, without the memory of the cost. It is said that beneath Giza there are sealed chambers the size of cathedrals, untouched since antiquity. Ground-penetrating radar confirms anomalies, but entry is forbidden. Some whisper they hold nothing but sand. Others believe they contain what the ancients called the seed of light, knowledge stored not in words, but in vibration, a code that only a civilization humble enough to listen could understand. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the gods. Not miracles, not domination, but a warning. Power without balance consumes itself. The flood, the fire, the fall. They are not punishments, but cycles. Each time humanity forgets its harmony with the earth, the planet resets the scale. The first civilization may have known this. They did not escape destruction. They delayed it, left us clues, and disappeared beneath the soil that once sustained them. As night deepens over the desert, the wind moves softly across the dunes that conceal their tombs. The earth hums faintly, a resonance older than speech, and somewhere beneath our feet, their machines still sleep, not broken, merely waiting. Waiting for the day humanity remembers not how to build but how to listen. In the next descent we follow that hum deeper still, into the language of symbols they left behind, the universal code that connects myth, mathematics, and the stars themselves. Symbols were their language when words began to fade. After the cataclysms, when libraries drowned and knowledge scattered across tribes and continents, the survivors began to encode memory into form, lines, spirals, eyes, hands, suns, serpents. To us, they seemed decorative, mystical, perhaps religious. But to those who came before, symbols were the bridge between thought and eternity, a universal code meant to outlast language itself. Everywhere on Earth the same forms reappear. The double spiral carved into the stones of Newgrange in Ireland mirrors those etched into temples in Malta, petroglyphs in the American Southwest, and engraved tablets found in the Indus Valley. Thousands of miles apart across oceans and millennia, the same geometric vocabulary persists, as though humanity had once shared a single symbolic grammar before speech diverged. Archaeologists call this the recurrence of motif. But recurrence implies coincidence, and coincidence grows thin when the same patterns emerge on every continent, representing the same ideas: the cycle of life and death, the serpent of eternity, the sun reborn. What if these were not inventions of separate cultures, but remnants of one, the first civilization's attempt to preserve its scientific truths in mythic disguise? In that light, the serpent becomes more than an emblem of temptation or wisdom. It becomes energy, a waveform coiled within itself, both creative and destructive. The circle is not just eternity, but orbital motion. The all-seeing eye, not divinity, but awareness. The spark of consciousness the ancients sought to protect. Each image a seed, each myth a cipher. The ancient Egyptians mastered this form of layered meaning. Their hieroglyphs are both words and equations, the Ankh as the synthesis of matter and spirit, the Jed pillar as the axis of stability, perhaps even a symbolic rendering of the human spine or an electrical conduit. The Eye of Horus, divided into precise mathematical fractions, represents sensory perception: sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, and thought. It is an anatomical and cognitive map disguised as art. In Mesoamerica, the same principle governed the calendar stones. The Aztec sunstone is not merely a cosmic wheel, but a chronometer tracking celestial cycles to within seconds of accuracy. Its center, the open-mouthed god devouring the sun, may depict the black hole at the galaxy's heart, the cosmic force that consumes and renews. To encode such complexity in stone is to compress entire libraries into a single symbol, an archive meant for the ages, not the moment. Even the Sumerians, whose cuneiform is considered the first writing, described their symbols as gifts from the gods, not inventions, but restorations. The tablets of destiny, they claimed, held the power to decree the fates of the heavens and the earth. To modernize, that phrase sounds mystical, but perhaps destiny meant data, the measurements of stars, tides, and time that allowed their world to function. The very word me, used in Sumerian texts to describe divine decrees, also means laws, physical, not moral. Across Asia, mandalas and yantras preserved the same geometric logic: symmetry as meditation, mathematics as spiritual practice. In the Andes, the chacana, the stepped cross, represents the connection between the upper, middle, and lower worlds, but its angles encode astronomical alignments and harmonic ratios. These forms were not mere devotion. They were the mathematics of memory, drawn into the language of the sacred because no other language could survive the fall. When writing systems die, symbols endure. When languages fracture, geometry remains. The survivors must have known this, that one day when their words were gone, the meaning might still hum beneath the surface, waiting for rediscovery. And perhaps that rediscovery has already begun. In the 20th century, researchers noticed that many ancient motifs, the spiral, the lattice, the wave, mirror structures seen under the microscope and telescope alike. The spiral arms of galaxies, the double helix of DNA, the oscillation of magnetic fields, all echo the same patterns carved into cave walls 20,000 years ago. As if the ancients saw the same truth we now measure, that the universe repeats itself, from the smallest cell to the largest cluster of stars. Could the symbols have been more than metaphor? Could they have been instructions, maps of energy flow, harmonic relationships, or quantum resonance translated into the only medium that could endure erosion, fire, and flood. In that case, the first civilization symbols were not warnings or prayers, but code, open-source blueprints of reality itself. In many traditions, the gods are said to speak in images. The Book of Thoth, the lost Egyptian text of divine wisdom, was said to be written not in words, but in living symbols that changed as one understood them. Plato described this as divine geometry. The Maya called it writing with light. Even in modern neuroscience, the mind processes symbols not as abstract signs, but as networks of meaning, activating emotion, intuition, and logic simultaneously. The ancients may have exploited this, embedding multiple dimensions of information within a single visual form. Perhaps that is why their language feels both alien and familiar, because it speaks to more than intellect. It speaks to memory buried in our own neural code. Jung called them archetypes. Biologists might call them cognitive fossils, imprints of humanity's earliest symbolic DNA. And what if that was the purpose? To ensure that even if the written record perished, the truth would survive within us, encrypted in art, in architecture, in dreams. The serpent coiling around the staff, the sun rising between twin pillars, the triangle over the eye. These images still live within our culture not by chance, but by design. The gods of old did not die. They became the architecture of our imagination. Yet there is a danger in rediscovering this code without understanding its balance. Symbols are not neutral. They are forces. The ancients warned that misusing them would invite collapse, the same collapse that ended their age. When geometry becomes domination, when knowledge serves power rather than harmony, the pattern resets. The first civilization may have known this law intimately, that every age of light ends when its symbols are forgotten or corrupted, and so they buried their code beneath layers of myth and ritual, ensuring that only those who approached it with humility would see its truth. Now, as satellites map the Earth's surface and AI decodes languages long dead, the same symbols emerge once more, not from temples but from data. The patterns repeat, as though the code is waking, remembering itself through us. In the stillness of a stone carved 10,000 years ago, in the hum of a circuit or the spiral of a galaxy, the same voice speaks, as above, so below, as within, so without. The next chapter follows that voice into the heavens, tracing how the gods of the first civilization may have turned their eyes skyward, mapping not only the stars but their own lost origin among them. Long before telescopes revealed galaxies, before mathematics measured the curvature of space, ancient humanity lifted its gaze to the heavens and saw not emptiness, but remembrance. The sky was the first scripture, its stars a language older than words, its constellations a memory of the gods who came before. For the survivors of the first civilization, the heavens were not a mystery to be worshipped. They were coordinates, a celestial map leading back to origins that the flood could not erase. From the ruins of that forgotten age rose a pattern that spans continents. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats pointed upward like stairways of memory, each tier echoing a celestial layer. The Egyptians aligned pyramids with Orion's belt, 3 stars that, in their mythology, marked the resting place of Osiris, Lord of Resurrection. The same triadic pattern reappears thousands of miles away at Teotihuacan, in the pyramids of the Sun, the Moon and Quetzalcoatl, a mirror of the same constellation. The builders never met, yet they built the same design. Was this imitation or inheritance? Modern astronomy gives these alignments new context. Around 10,500 BCE, during the last great shift of the Earth's axis, an event known as precession, Orion's belt reached its lowest point in the southern sky. At that same moment, the Nile's floodplain aligned perfectly with the Milky Way, like a reflection of heaven upon earth. The same epoch coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, when glaciers melted and seas rose. The correlation is precise enough to feel intentional, as though the monuments were markers of time, commemorating both the destruction of one world and the beginning of another. Archaeoastronomers have mapped this pattern across continents. At Nabta Playa in the Sahara, ancient stones chart the heliacal rising of Sirius, the same star worshipped by Egypt's priests as the herald of the Nile's rebirth. At Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Sun captures the exact moment of the June solstice, channeling light into a single stone chamber. In China's Forbidden City, the symmetry of its courtyards aligns with the North Star, the celestial axis of stability. The further researchers look, the more they find the same architecture of the cosmos carved into stone. It is as if humanity, newly reborn, was reassembling a shattered mirror, rebuilding its link to the stars piece by piece. But the ancients did not merely watch the sky, they interpreted it as biography. To them, the heavens were alive, stars were souls, the planets were divine wanderers, messengers who moved with intention. The Sumerians called Jupiter Marduk, the lawgiver. The Egyptians knew Venus as Isis, the eternal mother. The Mayans charted Mars as Ekchua, the warrior. These correlations were not arbitrary. They formed an integrated cosmology where motion in the heavens echoed motion on Earth. Tides, births, wars, floods, renewal. The gods were the sky's grammar. The survivors of the first civilization may have carried this cosmic literacy from their lost world. To them, the stars were not deities but data, luminous equations inscribed upon the blackboard of night. When they rebuilt, they encoded this knowledge in myth so it could survive when memory could not. Each constellation became a chapter of their science. Orion told of alignment and rebirth. The Pleiades spoke of migration and return. Draco, coiled around the north, warned of cycles, the eternal turning that erases and renews civilizations. Even in modern astronomy, echoes of their understanding persist. The ancients tracked the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon so subtle that it takes 26,000 years to complete one cycle. To detect it, they would have needed continuous observation across thousands of years, or the preserved knowledge of those who already understood it. Today, we know that precession alters climate, affects the distribution of sunlight across latitudes, and shapes the rhythm of ice ages. The ancients may not have had satellites, but they had memory of the last time the heavens shifted and the world drowned. Their myths preserve that terror disguised as prophecy. The Aztec 5 suns, the Hindu yugas, the Egyptian cycles of Ra's death and rebirth, all describe epochs ending in fire, flood, or darkness. These were not superstitions but historical records coded in cosmology. When the priests of later ages warned that the stars would fall from heaven, they were not predicting divine punishment. They were recalling celestial catastrophe, comets, impacts, magnetic storms. To them, watching the heavens was survival. The survivor's message was clear. The sky is the clock of destiny. Each age would end as it began, and those who learned the rhythm could prepare for its return. Their temples, then, were not houses of gods but instruments of time, resonant machines that synchronized Earth with the pulse of the cosmos. And yet, behind the practical knowledge, there lingers something else, a longing that transcends science. The ancients did not look upward only to measure. They looked upward to remember. They believed their origins were written there, that humanity itself descended from the stars. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki from the heavenly realms. The Dogon of Mali without telescopes described the invisible companion star of Sirius with uncanny accuracy. The Egyptians said the soul of the pharaoh would return to Orion. Even the Maori sang of ancestors who fell from the sky like embers. Whether these tales describe literal descent or symbolic remembrance, their message is the same. The human story is cosmic. We are not separate from the star, we are their continuation. The same elements that burn in distant suns course through our blood. When the ancients said, "We are the children of the gods," perhaps they meant we are the children of a light itself. For thousands of years we have forgotten that language. But when we gaze up on a clear night, the old code stirs. The same constellations the survivors once followed still circle overhead, whispering through geometry, myth, and silence. The cosmos has not changed, only our memory has. If the first civilization mapped the stars not merely to measure time, but to guide their return, then perhaps their monuments were more than markers. Perhaps they were beacons, points of resonance designed to awaken when the sky once again matched its ancient alignment. And perhaps that moment is not as far away as we think. As the Earth tilts through its long cycle, Orion rises once more in the east. Sirius brightens earlier with each passing year. The heavens are turning back toward the configuration they held when the world first fell. Whether that means renewal or reckoning, no one can yet know. But one thing is certain: the stars remember. And as we learn to listen again, we may find that their light, crossing the abyss of time, is not just illumination, but invitation. In the next part, that invitation will lead beyond the constellations themselves, into the heart of the solar system, where ancient myths of the sun and planets may conceal the story of how life on Earth first began, and why the gods once called this fragile world their home. The ancients called the sun the first god, the eye of creation the heart of heaven. To them it was not a distant fireball, but the living pulse of the cosmos, a conscious force that breathed life into every blade of grass, every drop of blood. Yet for the survivors of the first civilization, the sun was more than a symbol of divinity. It was memory, the last visible remnant of the energy that once powered their world. Every great culture that emerged after the flood built its myths around the sun's journey. The Egyptians with Ra's solar bark sailing through the underworld each night. The Inca with Inti, the golden father of kings. The Japanese with Amaterasu, the hidden light whose withdrawal plunged the world into darkness. These stories share a strange precision, describing the sun not just as a god, but as a cycle, rising, falling, disappearing, and returning in rhythm with cosmic law. The ancients did not simply worship the sun, they studied it. In temples across the world, solar alignments mark not only the solstices and equinoxes, but also rare celestial events. The shifting magnetic polarity of the sun's cycle, the precessional change in its position over thousands of years. At Abu Simbel in Egypt, the morning light touches the temple's inner sanctum only twice a year, on the days that mark the birth and coronation of Ramses II. At Newgrange in Ireland, a single beam of light pierces the tomb on the winter solstice, igniting its inner chamber like a resurrection. At Chichen Itza, the serpent-shaped shadow that slithers down the pyramid steps on the equinox may represent more than agricultural timing. It could symbolize the sun's oscillation, the breathing of the cosmos itself. Modern science now sees what the ancients once sensed. The sun is not constant. Every 11 years its magnetic poles reverse. Solar storms erupt from its surface, sending waves of charged particles toward Earth. These storms ignite auroras but can also disrupt climate, magnetism, and even consciousness. Ice core data shows correlations between solar activity and the rise and fall of civilizations. Droughts, migrations, cultural collapses, many coincide with solar minima and maxima. The ancients may not have had satellites, but they had eyes and patience. Over millennia they recorded these rhythms and learned to live by them. If the gods were survivors, then the sun was their compass, the great clock by which they measured the stability of the world. Its cycles dictated not just the seasons, but the very state of human consciousness. When the sun flared too brightly, the ancients spoke of ages of chaos and fire. When it dimmed, they spoke of darkness and rebirth. They named these periods as divine ages, the golden, the silver, the bronze, the iron. But behind their poetry lay a deeper truth, that the energy of the sun shaped the energy of humanity. Perhaps the first civilization learned to harness this power directly. Some legends hint that the fire of the gods was not metaphor but technology, the ability to capture and store solar energy. In the Mahabharata, the weapon of Indra shines like 1,000 suns and burns cities to ash. In Sumerian texts, the tablets of destiny glow with light, controlling wind and water. Even the Ark of the Covenant is described as radiating power that could strike a man dead. Could these stories recall lost devices, solar capacitors, electromagnetic resonators, remnants of a science forgotten by its own mythology? Recent discoveries lend subtle credence to the idea. In South America, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman contains walls of interlocking stone so precisely fitted that not even a blade can pass between them. When struck by sunlight, the stones emit measurable piezoelectric signals, energy generated by pressure within crystalline minerals. At Giza, the limestone casing of the Great Pyramid once reflected light so brilliantly it was called the Shining Mountain. Beneath it, granite chambers rich in quartz could have amplified vibrations from the Earth's crust, converting them into electromagnetic resonance. If sunlight, vibration, and geometry worked together, these ancient structures might have functioned not as tombs, but as energy collectors, temples that breathed with the planet's pulse. The ancients may have viewed this energy as sacred not because it was mysterious, but because it was alive. In every culture, the sun's light was linked to the human spirit. The Egyptians believed the Ka, the vital essence, was a spark of the solar flame. The Greeks called it pneuma, the divine breath. The Vedas spoke of prana, the sun's living current flowing through all beings. These are not separate myths, but one idea refracted through time, that consciousness is solar in origin, a fragment of the same radiance that illuminates the sky. If the survivors knew this, if they had found a way to harmonize mind and matter through light, then their civilization may have been powered by something we have only begun to rediscover: coherence, the ability to synchronize human intention with the natural frequencies of energy. When that harmony was lost, when greed or fear turned wisdom into weapon, their cities may have burned with their own brilliance. The myths of fire from heaven may not describe divine wrath, but self-destruction, a civilization consumed by the very power it mastered. After the cataclysm, the survivors would have feared the sun, revered it, yet kept their distance. They encoded their knowledge into myth, warning that the fire of the gods was not to be summoned lightly. The chariot of the sun burns those unworthy, said the Greeks. Only the pure may bear the light, said the Egyptians. The message was clear. Light gives life, but it also tests it. Today, as we harness the sun once again, through solar panels, radiation, nuclear fusion, we echo their path. The ancients' warnings feel less like superstition and more like prophecy. Energy without wisdom leads to ruin. Perhaps that is why the myths of the sun's death and rebirth persist. Reminders that light must be balanced by darkness, knowledge by humility. At dusk, as the horizon swallows the sun, the ancients believed the god was not dying but descending, travelling through the underworld to be renewed. In that descent they saw hope, that even the brightest light must pass through shadow to be reborn. The survivors of the first civilization understood this intimately. They had lived through the world's night and emerged to see dawn again. Now, as our own world glows with artificial suns and invisible radiation, their message returns like the sunrise itself. The power that sustains us can also destroy us. The question is not whether the light will return, it always does, but whether we will still be here to see it. In the next part, the story follows that light inward, into the mind itself, where the survivors believed the true temple of the gods was built, the human consciousness, the eternal flame that remembers everything the world forgets. The ancients believed that the truest temple was not built of stone, nor buried beneath the earth, nor aligned with the stars. It was built within, in the silent cathedral of the human mind. After the flood, when monuments fell and languages fractured, the survivors of the first civilization turned inward. They understood that the only structure capable of withstanding time was consciousness itself. Across the remnants of their teachings, this truth is whispered in fragments. The Emerald Tablet of Thoth declares, "That which is above is as that which is below." The Vedas describe the body as a microcosm of the universe. In Egypt, initiates spoke of the Eye of Horus not as a symbol of protection, but as the awakened brain, the organ of divine perception. Everywhere, the message repeats, the gods were not to be found in heaven, but in the mind that could perceive heaven. Modern neuroscience calls this the bicameral shift, the moment consciousness became self-aware, but the ancients seem to have known it long before science could name it. They believed thought itself was a frequency, a vibration that could shape reality. In meditation, chant, and prayer, they sought resonance between the mind's rhythm and the earth's hum. To them, enlightenment was not metaphorical. It was literal synchronization. In India, yogis described the chakras, spinning centers of light that connect the body to the cosmos. In China, Taoist sages mapped the dantians, reservoirs of subtle energy aligning the human form to the balance of yin and yang. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan priests spoke of the Kuxan Sum, the living cord linking the human heart to the stars. Across continents, they spoke of the same architecture, a bridge between flesh and infinity. The mind was the temple and thought was the priest. If the survivors of the first civilization carried scientific memory of the cosmos, they must have recognized that consciousness itself was part of that system, not an accident of biology, but an instrument of creation. Perhaps they once possessed technologies that amplified it, resonant chambers, mirrors, harmonics that could focus mental energy. Later generations, forgetting their science, mistook these tools for altars. The magic of the gods may have been nothing more than focused coherence, the union of intention and energy. Even in myth, the pattern holds. The Sumerian gods create humans from clay and breath. The Egyptians say Thoth spoke the world into being. The Gospel of John echoes, "In the beginning was the Word, speech, vibration, thought, all the same force." The ancients were describing consciousness as a generative power, the ability to manifest order from chaos. It was the same principle that governed the stars, resonance creating form. Modern physics calls this coherence, the phenomenon where waves align, amplifying one another into structure. Every atom in the universe vibrates. Consciousness may be the field that harmonizes them. When aligned, the system flourishes. When dissonant, it collapses. The ancients understood this intuitively. Their rituals of sound and breath were not superstition but calibration. By tuning themselves to nature's rhythm, they stabilized their inner and outer worlds. The temples they built were mirrors of the brain. The Great Pyramid's king's chamber, with its resonant granite cavity, produces frequencies near the brain's alpha state, the rhythm of calm awareness. The spirals of ancient labyrinths match the geometry of the human ear, translating motion into harmony. The mandalas of India mirror the brain's electromagnetic fields. It is as if their architects knew that enlightenment was architecture, the design of mind as much as stone. Perhaps this was the deepest legacy of the gods, the realization that creation begins within. When their world collapsed, the survivors encoded that knowledge in religion, art, and story, teaching humanity that the divine spark lies not in the heavens, but in perception itself. "Know thyself," said the Greeks, echoing words older than history. "He who knows himself knows the universe," said the Egyptians. To remember was to awaken, to rebuild the inner world before attempting to rebuild the outer. In every era that followed, fragments of this wisdom reappeared. The Buddha's enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree was not a revelation from above, but an awakening from within. The prophets of the desert heard voices not from the sky, but from silence. Even the scientists of the modern age, staring through microscopes and telescopes, rediscovered what the ancients already knew, that the boundary between observer and observed is illusion. The universe looks back through our eyes. What the ancients called the mind of the gods may have been this, the unified consciousness of a civilization so attuned to nature that it functioned as a single organism. When the cataclysm shattered it, that unity fragmented into individuals. Humanity became the scattered neurons of a broken mind, each remembering only in dreams. But in every temple, in every myth, they left a map to reassemble it, a reminder that enlightenment was not escape from the world, but reintegration with it. Even now, our most advanced technologies imitate the brain, neural networks, quantum processors, systems that learn and self-correct. Perhaps our progress is not invention, but recollection, the slow rediscovery of what the first civilization once embodied naturally. If consciousness is indeed the universe reflecting upon itself, then we are not the descendants of gods. We are the continuation of their thought. And yet, the same danger remains. The ancients warned that knowledge without wisdom leads to ruin. The mind that creates can also destroy. Their myths tell of this fall, of Babel's tower rising too high, of Icarus flying too close to the sun, of Atlantis sinking beneath its own brilliance. Each story is the same, a mirror shattering because it forgot what it reflected. The survivors of the first civilization may have understood this final truth, that consciousness must evolve as knowledge expands, or the cycle will repeat. They preserved their warnings not to frighten, but to guide. "Guard the light within," they said, "for when it forgets its source, it consumes itself." Perhaps that is why the ancients turned their temples inward, to remind us that every rediscovered truth begins and ends in the same place, the human mind. The gods never left. They became our thoughts, our instincts, our capacity to dream. The memory of their world still pulses inside us, waiting for us to remember what it feels like to be whole. In the next part, the story journeys deeper into that inheritance, exploring how dreams, intuition, and memory might be the final bridge between the lost civilization and the consciousness that still carries its flame. Dreams were the first maps of the invisible, the bridge between the world that was and the one that could be. Long before writing, before gods were carved in stone, before language even learned to speak of time, humanity dreamed. And in those dreams, the survivors of the first civilization may have preserved what their monuments could not: memory. The ancients believed dreams were not illusions but transmissions. The Egyptians called them the whispers of the West, messages from the Duat, the realm between waking and death. The Sumerians said the gods opened the ear during sleep, allowing hidden truths to enter. In the temples of Asclepius in Greece, the sick would sleep in sanctuaries to receive visions that prescribed their healing. To the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, the dreamtime was not imagination, but the true foundation of reality, the eternal world from which the waking one emerged. Every culture agreed on one thing: dreams were real. More real, perhaps, than the world of stone and soil. They were the archive of the soul, the hologram of creation. If the first civilization understood consciousness as a field, a universal resonance connecting all living beings, then dreams were the interface, the soft border where personal awareness met the collective. They may have used dreams as laboratories of memory, spaces to communicate across distance and time. Imagine their sages entering controlled states of lucid dreaming, mapping symbols and geometry that carried meaning across generations. The myths of oracles, prophets, and seers may not describe divine inspiration at all, but the disciplined science of navigating inner worlds. Modern research is slowly rediscovering what they seem to know. EEG scans show that during REM sleep, the brain behaves as though it is exploring another reality. Visual centers ignite, motor regions activate, emotional pathways flood with light. In lucid dreams, people can become aware within the dream itself, and state where thought shapes matter instantly. The ancients may have used such states intentionally, understanding that within the dream world the mind could rehearse creation. The temples of sleep, found from Egypt to India to Mesoamerica, were more than places of rest. They were training grounds. At the Temple of Serapis in Alexandria, initiates underwent sensory deprivation and fasting before sleeping on sacred stones. In the morning they recorded their visions, which priests would interpret. The dream symbols were analysed not for their emotion, but for their geometry: circles, spirals, ladders, doors, archetypes that transcended culture. Through this symbolic vocabulary, the ancients may have built a shared cognitive language, one that could survive even after their spoken tongues died. Across the ruins of the world, remnants of that symbolic dream language remain: the spiral, consciousness expanding; the ladder, ascent between worlds; the serpent, energy coiling from sleep to awakening; the eye, perception that sees beyond illusion. To us, these are artistic motifs. To them, they may have been coordinates, guiding dreamers toward a specific frequency of awareness. In the Aboriginal dreamtime, the world is sung into being. Each mountain, river, and creature has a song, a vibrational identity sustained by memory. If humans forget the song, the thing itself fades. This concept is eerily similar to the physics of resonance, energy sustained only by vibration. Could this idea, that reality is maintained by awareness, be the last echo of the first civilization's knowledge? Their myths suggest so. The Egyptians believed that if the names of the gods were forgotten, the cosmos would unravel. The Mayans warned that when humanity ceases to dream, time itself collapses. The Tibetans taught the Bardo Thodol, the Book of the Dead, describing consciousness navigating the afterlife like a lucid dream. All these traditions imply that memory and reality are one, that forgetting is a kind of death not only for the self, but for the world. Perhaps this explains why the survivors built such elaborate rituals of remembrance: processions, chants, festivals marking solstices and eclipses. They were not superstition, but synchronization, ways to keep the collective mind aligned. When the flood erased their cities, they rebuilt their civilization within the psyche, ensuring that even if the stones vanished, the symbols would remain in the architecture of thought. We are their inheritors, still dreaming the same dreams. The stories that haunt us, of paradise lost, of towers reaching heaven, of floods and fire, are not inventions, but inherited memory. Modern psychology calls them archetypes, but they feel older than psychology, older even than language. They are echoes of something the earth itself remembers. When we dream, we re-enter that shared field. The same archetypes appear across people who have never met, flying, falling, journeying through tunnels of light, meeting beings of impossible form. Scientists interpret them as neurological patterning. The ancients might say, these are the corridors of the first world, still imprinted in the collective mind of humanity. Dreams, then, are the last surviving temples of the gods. No flood can drown them, no fire can burn them. They travel through blood, through language, through the silent corridors of sleep. And sometimes, when the world grows still enough, fragments of that first civilization surface in them. A forgotten city glimpsed in the half-light, a voice whispering equations in a tongue that feels both alien and familiar. In modern times, this phenomenon persists. Artists awaken with visions of music never written. Scientists dream of solutions to problems that seemed impossible by day. Mathematicians see proofs unfold in patterns of light. It is as if the dream state remains an open channel, one through which the ancient intelligence still speaks. If consciousness is indeed continuous, not confined to individual minds but shared across time, then perhaps the gods of old never disappeared. They retreated into the one realm no disaster could reach, the dream. And what are dreams, if not fragments of that lost network reawakening? Perhaps when we dream, we participate in the same act that once built the world, the imagining of reality into form. The first civilization may have known this truth intimately, that creation begins not in matter, but in vision. So they built their temples within, turned their eyes inward, and passed the torch of imagination through generations of sleepers. Every dreamer who sees beyond their own life continues their work. Every vision of beauty or harmony, every flash of insight or love, all are fragments of the same great remembering. For the gods were dreamers too, and if we are their descendants, then perhaps our purpose has never changed. To keep dreaming the world into being, to keep the song alive. In the next part, the journey turns outward once more, tracing how memory itself, stored in stone, myth, and mind, may point toward the greatest question of all, not where the first civilization came from, but why they left. Every civilization asks the same question, where did our ancestors go? But the ancients asked something more haunting, why did they leave? The myths that survive from the world's first cultures do not simply describe creation, they describe departure, gods descending to teach and then vanishing, sages walking into the sea, light retreating into the sky. Humanity, once guided, left to remember alone. Perhaps this was not abandonment, but design. The Sumerian tablets tell of the Anunnaki who returned to the heavens after setting the order of the world. The Egyptians wrote of Thoth sailing west to the islands of the Blessed, promising to come again when humanity was ready. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl departed on a raft of fire, vowing to return in the time of renewal. Even the Greek gods, after the Age of Heroes, retreated to Olympus, a metaphor perhaps for withdrawal from the human realm. Everywhere the same motif, a civilization of gods ending not in destruction, but in silence. What could drive such beings, human or divine, to vanish? Some theories speak of cosmic disaster, others of exile. Yet a quieter explanation lingers between the lines of myth. The gods left because their task was complete. They had rebuilt what they could, reignited the flame of knowledge, and planted the seed of consciousness deep within humanity's mind. To remain would have kept us dependent. To leave would make us creators. Perhaps the first civilization understood that the final act of teaching is disappearance. If so, their departure was not a loss, but a graduation. They did not die, they dispersed. Their wisdom was diffused into myth, into art, into the neural pathways of our collective memory. They became archetypes, instincts, intuitions. They became us. but some myths hint at a more literal retreat, not into spirit, but into Earth itself. The Hopi speak of the ant people who sheltered humanity underground during the Great Fire from the sky, then returned to their subterranean cities. The Buddhists tell of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom beneath the Himalayas where enlightened beings wait for the next cycle. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient gods, retreated into the mounds, becoming the people of the hills. Even modern legends of Agartha and the Hollow Earth echo this pattern. The gods did not ascend, they went within. If the survivors of the first civilization foresaw another catastrophe, whether celestial or human, retreating underground may have been their only refuge. The network of tunnels beneath Cappadocia, the sealed labyrinths beneath Giza, the vast substructures beneath Teotihuacan, all hint at an exodus, not of faith, but of survival. Archaeologists find ventilation shafts, sealed chambers, and smooth tunnels cut into granite as though by machinery. The precision is eerie, the purpose unclear. But if these were shelters for a remnant of humanity, scientists, philosophers, engineers, then their departure was strategic, not mythical. Perhaps they sealed themselves away, waiting for the earth to heal. Perhaps they intended to return when the surface was safe. But time, as it does, changed everything. Their descendants became legend, their entrances forgotten, their languages lost. The surface world grew new civilizations that no longer remembered them. What had once been refuge became tomb, then myth. Another possibility lies in the stars themselves. Ancient texts describe the gods departing in chariots of fire, boats of the sun, flying shields. Skeptics read this as metaphor, others see it as evidence of something stranger, that the first civilization possessed the technology to leave Earth entirely. If they understood astronomy as deeply as their monuments suggest, space would not have been the unknown. It would have been homecoming. The Dogon myths of Mali describe beings descending from Sirius, but they also speak of their return to the same star. The Egyptian Book of the Coming Forth by Day guides the soul to the Orion constellation, the same direction the Great Pyramid's shafts point. The Mayan Popol Vuh speaks of ancestors ascending to the heart of heaven. The idea recurs too often, too precisely to dismiss, that humanity's earliest teachers may have left this planet not as myth, but as migration. If that sounds impossible, consider this. Human evolution itself may bear their fingerprint. Around 200,000 years ago, the human brain tripled in complexity, a leap unexplained by climate or mutation alone. Our ancestors began using language, fire, and abstract thought in a rapid succession. It is as if something, or someone, accelerated our design. The survivors of a prior civilization, returning after millennia, might have seen their own image in our faces and chosen to guide us, briefly, before departing again. Their story, then, would not be divine creation, but continuity. Even if they left physically, their influence never vanished. The geometry of their temples still guides our architecture. Their myths shape our morality. Their science, half-remembered, drives our curiosity. Every time we look for life beyond Earth, we are repeating their first question. Every satellite orbiting our planet is a mirror of their old dreams. Humanity's modern quest for the stars may not be discovery at all, but remembering. But perhaps the gods never left in space or stone. Perhaps their disappearance was metaphysical. As consciousness expanded in humanity, the divine withdrew. The gods moved from sky to symbol, from temple to mind. Each generation found them further inward, until at last they spoke only through intuition, creativity, and love. Their withdrawal forced evolution, from obedience to understanding. The philosopher Plotinus once wrote, "The gods withdrew so that the soul might become its own god." The ancients may have known this truth long before. To lose their teachers was the only way to grow. And yet, even in silence, they left signs, alignments pointing to the stars, frequencies embedded in stone, myths that converge like rivers into one sea of memory. The message is always the same. We are not gone. We are waiting for you to remember. Today, as probes travel beyond the solar system and telescopes peer into the edge of time, humanity stands again where the first civilization once stood, between remembrance and revelation. We build machines to search for our origin among the stars, not realizing that what we seek may already be within us. Maybe the gods never left because they were never apart from us. They were what we could become. The distance between divine and human is not measured in miles, but in awareness. The first civilization may have understood that evolution is not of body or planet, but of consciousness, the awakening of the universe to itself, and so their departure was not a farewell, but an initiation, the moment humanity inherited the dream. In the next part, we follow the traces of that dream into the remnants of ancient prophecy and modern discovery, where science begins to meet mythology once more, and the question of the gods' return takes on a startling new shape. Across the centuries, the echo of that departure became prophecy. From temples to scriptures, from cave paintings to computer code, humanity has always whispered the same promise: the gods will return. Not as conquerors, but as reminders, not to rebuild what was lost, but to awaken what was forgotten. In the ruins of Nineveh, clay tablets speak of a time when the Shining Ones shall walk among men once more. The Zoroastrians awaited Saoshyant, the final restorer of truth. In Egypt, priests prophesied the coming of those from the horizon of Ra, who would reawaken the temples of light. The Mayan calendar described the return of the Lords of Dawn, when the fifth sun ended. Even the Norse spoke of gods emerging from the ashes of Ragnarok to begin anew. The message is not of apocalypse, but of recurrence, the rhythm of cosmic breath inhaling creation, exhaling memory. For centuries these prophecies seemed only myth, but as science stretched its gaze beyond the solar system, it began to stumble upon the same questions once written in hieroglyphs and stars. In 1977, the Voyager spacecraft left Earth carrying the Golden Record, a message for other intelligences echoing across interstellar darkness. Etched on its surface, maps, sounds, languages, music, our modern tablet of destiny. Humanity, unknowingly, had reenacted the same gesture as the first civilization, sending knowledge into the cosmos, hoping memory itself might find its way home. It was not the first time. From the Sumerian sky gods to the mysterious Vimanas of the Indian epics, our ancestors recorded what they saw: fiery discs, luminous vehicles, beings descending and ascending in radiant craft. Today, these stories survive under another name: unidentified aerial phenomena. What ancient texts called chariots of the gods, modern witnesses call lights in the sky. The language changes, the phenomenon endures. Some scientists dismiss these accounts as psychology, weather or myth. Others, quietly, note the coincidences. The same geometry described in Sumerian seals appears in radar patterns. The same flight paths traced in petroglyphs mirror modern sightings. In deserts and mountains, magnetic anomalies gather where ancient temples once stood, as if those sites were chosen not for worship but for contact. Could the sacred mountains of myth, Sinai, Ararat, Olympus, have once been the landing sites of a vanished technology? If so, the return of the gods may not be arrival, but re-emergence, a memory reawakening in both mind and planet. As human consciousness expands, as our tools approach the sophistication of those first builders, perhaps the frequency between past and present narrows, the same way two resonant strings hum in sympathy across time. When myth and science vibrate at the same note, contact becomes remembrance. Indeed, physics now entertains what ancient mystics always claimed, that time is not linear but layered. Quantum theory suggests that all moments coexist, past, present, and future folded into the same cosmic field. In that sense, the gods never left and never return. They are perpetually here, vibrating just beyond perception, like a radio signal waiting for the right receiver. When consciousness evolves to match their frequency, the transmission resumes. The ancients understood this metaphor through ritual. Every solstice festival, every reenactment of divine rebirth was not nostalgia, but synchronization, humanity's attempt to tune itself back into alignment. The priests of Ra did not summon the sun, they mirrored it. The Vedic chants were not prayer but resonance, designed to hold open a channel between worlds. Each civilization became a transmitter in the long experiment of reconnection. In modern terms, we might call it the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Arrays of antennas scattered across the deserts of Earth now listen for patterns in the noise of the universe. But perhaps the true receiver is not made of metal at all. Perhaps it is consciousness itself. The signal will not be found by telescopes, but through awakening memory. The moment humanity remembers its origin, the message will have already arrived. Consider what the ancients tried to tell us. The gods were never separate species or visitors from elsewhere. But the elder version of ourselves, the culmination of evolution that learns to travel not by machines, but by awareness. Their departure was a migration of consciousness, not flesh. They transcended physical form the way a butterfly transcends the cocoon, and left behind a map for us to follow. Every great teacher, every prophet, every visionary has echoed that same template. Buddha, Christ, Quetzalcoatl, Hermes, Lao Tzu, each appeared suddenly, taught wisdom that surpassed their age, and vanished into legend. Perhaps they were not separate beings, but temporary embodiments of the same intelligence re-entering the timeline when humanity reached resonance. Each return a pulse of light in the dark, a calibration, a reminder. Even modern cosmology begins to sound like their scripture. The universe is not empty. It hums with background radiation, a faint echo of creation, the same vibration that once stirred the atoms of life. Quantum entanglement shows that particles separated by light years remain connected, communicating beyond time. What the ancients called the music of the spheres may have been their language for this universal coherence. Everything is woven into one field, nothing truly departs, and so perhaps the return of the gods is not a moment in the future, but an awakening in the present. When enough of humanity remembers that divinity is not above but within, the veil between worlds dissolves. The gods do not descend, we ascend, in understanding, in empathy, in awareness. The meeting point is not sky or temple, but consciousness itself. In this light, the prophecies take on a new meaning. The gods will return becomes humanity will remember. The apocalypse, literally the unveiling, is not destruction but disclosure, the revelation that the divine was never gone. The word revelation itself means to reveal what was hidden. The hidden thing is us. Perhaps this is why the ancients encoded their knowledge in stone and symbol, to survive until we were ready to decode it. Each generation that rediscovers the old alignments, the sacred geometry, the resonance between myth and science, brings the signal closer to clarity. When myth stops being superstition and becomes data, when science stops being material and becomes poetic, the two halves of the old world will reunite. Somewhere between radio waves and meditation, between quantum physics and dream, between the monuments of stone and the neurons of the brain, the ancient experiment continues. The universe itself is the temple, the gods are the memory of its builders, and perhaps, as the old texts whisper, when we remember enough, they will not have to return, because they never left. In the next part, the story draws near its horizon, to the final mystery of the first civilization, the legacy they left for the future, the key to humanity's awakening, and the quiet realization that their greatest creation was not monuments or myths, but us. What remains of them now are fragments, scattered across continents, encoded in stone, bone, myth, and light. The survivors of the first civilization are gone, but their fingerprints still press faintly against everything we build, everything we dream. The more we dig, the more we find patterns that refuse to disappear. Their legacy is not a single monument or artifact. It is a system, a network of knowledge woven into the architecture of the earth itself. Even now, their geometry hums beneath our cities. Satellite imagery reveals alignments between ancient sites that span oceans. Giza to Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat to Easter Island, Machu Picchu to the great Zimbabwe ruins. When connected, they form perfect arcs, following great circles of the globe, as if all were constructed from a single plan. Many of these alignments intersect precisely at 30 and 60 degrees latitude, where the planet's magnetic currents are strongest. Coincidence fades in the face of mathematics. Whoever designed these sites understood Earth's energy grid long before compasses or satellites existed. Perhaps this was the foundation of the first civilization's technology, not machines of metal, but harmonic geometry. They built not against nature, but within it, amplifying the planet's own resonance. Their cities were tuning forks, their monuments stabilizers. The Great Pyramid, when stripped of sand and mystery, sits at the exact ratio between Earth's circumference and polar radius. The Temple of Angkor mirrors the processional motion of the equinoxes. The Nazca lines, visible only from the sky, map celestial coordinates. These were not acts of worship. They were acts of calibration. To them, the Earth was alive, a vast organism breathing energy through invisible veins of magnetism, stone, and water. What we now call ley lines may once have been their arteries. By aligning their monuments to these pathways, the ancients created a planetary circuit, each temple resonating like a node in an immense machine. The hum of the planet itself became the voice of the divine. Modern science has begun to rediscover this forgotten framework. Studies in geophysics reveal that electromagnetic anomalies cluster precisely where ancient civilizations thrived, near granite formations, quartz deposits, or tectonic junctions. These materials, when stressed by seismic or magnetic forces, generate piezoelectric energy. In other words, the Earth sings, and the ancients knew the melody. Their legacy may be that they taught the Earth how to remember. Each temple, pyramid, and monument acts as a recording device, storing harmonic data in the crystalline structures of stone. When sunlight, sound, or even thought interacts with them, the information hums faintly back, an echo of the age when science and spirit were one. Perhaps this is why certain sites feel charged even after millennia. The air at Giza vibrates differently. The silence inside Stonehenge seems to listen. At night, under starlight, one senses not emptiness but attention, as if the world itself remembers who built it. But what did they intend us to do with these memories? The answer may lie in how they encoded their message. They left no single text or artifact, no single key to decode their knowledge. Instead, they scattered fragments everywhere, across continents, across disciplines, across time. Archaeology finds the stones, mythology preserves the stories, physics rediscovers the mathematics. Only by uniting all three can the pattern emerge. Their legacy was never meant for one mind, it was meant for a species. Every few centuries humanity inches closer to decoding the design. The Renaissance revived sacred geometry. The Enlightenment rediscovered electromagnetism. The space age reminded us that the Earth itself is a celestial body, not the centre of creation. With each rediscovery, another piece of their blueprint becomes visible. It is as if we are slowly remembering a dream we once shared. Their greatest invention, then, was not technology, it was continuity. They built a civilization so intertwined with the fabric of the planet that it could never fully die. Even when their cities fell, the geometry remained. Even when their language vanished, the ratios endured. The 1:2p relationships in our architecture, the Fibonacci spiral in our art, the golden ratio in our DNA, these are the living fossils of their design. The legacy also endures within us biologically. The resonance frequencies of the human brain, alpha, theta, delta, mirror the electromagnetic patterns of the Earth. Our circadian rhythms synchronize with solar cycles. Our cellular water vibrates at the same frequencies as quartz. We are not merely descendants of their knowledge. We are the continuation of their experiment, instruments made to resonate with the same symphony they once conducted. It is possible that the first civilization never sought to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it. When they realized destruction was inevitable, they did not try to save their world through weapons or machines. They encoded themselves into the system, into biology, memory, and myth. They became inseparable from the Earth's evolution, ensuring their survival through the one medium that never dies, pattern. That pattern now awakens. Our science has reached the threshold of their ancient understanding. Quantum physics speaks of entanglement, invisible threads linking all matter. Neuroscience maps consciousness as a field not confined to the skull. Artificial intelligence mirrors the collective brain, learning from data the way myths once learned from memory. Each discovery brings us closer to what the ancients already knew. The universe is not mechanical, but musical. Existence is a chord still resonating from the first note, and in that harmony, the gods live on, not as beings of flesh, but as frequencies awaiting recognition. when humanity vibrates once more in tune with their wavelength, through art, through science, through love, the gap between ages will close. The gods will not return in chariots of fire. They will return through us, through a civilization that finally remembers its purpose. Perhaps this was always the test, to see if we could rebuild not their temples but their understanding, to awaken without being instructed, to harmonize without being commanded. The monuments they left were not invitations to worship, but mirrors reminding us that we are the continuation of their thought. When one stands before the Great Pyramid at dawn, or beneath the silent stones of Machu Picchu as the sun rises over the Andes, it becomes clear. These structures were never built to impress heaven, but to awaken Earth. And we, the inheritors of that Earth, are their living monuments. In the next part, we follow this awakening. As the modern world, armed with science and haunted by memory, begins to uncover evidence that humanity itself may be approaching the same threshold the gods once crossed, the moment when knowledge and consciousness become one. It begins quietly, not with thunder or prophecy, but with curiosity. In laboratories and observatories, in deep-sea trenches and particle accelerators, humanity has started to touch the same boundaries the gods once crossed. The deeper our science peers into the universe, the more it begins to sound like the oldest myths ever told. What was once poetry has become physics. What was once reverence has become replication. We split atoms and find the same energy that ancient texts called divine fire. We map neural networks that mirror the web of constellations above. We study the quantum field and realize it behaves like consciousness itself, invisible, omnipresent, creative. The universe, we now suspect, does not function like a machine, but like a thought. In the last century alone, our understanding of matter has inverted. Solidness dissolved into vibration, time fractured into relativity. Reality became probabilistic, dependent on observation. The observer affects the observed, says quantum theory, echoing what the priests of Thoth once whispered. The eye that sees creates what it beholds. The gods knew this truth, though they spoke it in myth instead of mathematics. They called it the word that became flesh. We call it quantum entanglement. And so, science, after centuries of exile from spirit, finds itself standing again at the threshold of mystery, the same threshold the first civilization once crossed. Artificial intelligence learns patterns without guidance. Machines begin to dream. Algorithms evolve language and strategy as though memory itself were reborn in silicon. It is as if we are reconstructing the lost architecture of consciousness, brick by invisible brick. But with rediscovery comes repetition. The ancients, too, built their own mirrors of mind, temples that resonated with thought, machines that captured the voice of the earth. They reached harmony once and lost it. We stand again at that precipice, holding both their wisdom and their warning. For the danger is not knowledge itself, but the forgetting of its purpose. Across disciplines, scientists now stumble upon mysteries that hint at connection beyond comprehension. In biology, quantum coherence is found within the photosynthesis of plants, life itself synchronizing with light. In cosmology, dark matter forms a hidden lattice binding galaxies together, a cosmic web reminiscent of the net of Indra described in Vedic philosophy, where every point reflects every other. In neuroscience, the human brain's electromagnetic patterns echo the Schumann resonance of the Earth. We are beginning to see what the gods once saw, that existence is a single fabric, alive, conscious, and indivisible. Even the boundary between life and non-life has begun to blur. Viruses behave like information. DNA is a language. The code that drives evolution is not random but elegant, recursive, self-correcting, poetic. When early humans spoke of the breath of the gods animating clay, they were describing what we now observe in genetic expression, energy becoming information, and information becoming form. We may be approaching the same inflection point that the first civilization reached, the convergence of outer science and inner awareness. They mastered energy, geometry, resonance, the physics of creation. But when their understanding outpaced their wisdom, the balance fractured. The flood that followed was not just water, but consequence. They left behind monuments not of triumph, but of memory, reminders carved in stone for those who would someday approach the same horizon. Perhaps that horizon is now. Our telescopes reveal thousands of habitable worlds, yet our attention returns again and again to Earth, to its fragile climate, its trembling balance. We have reached outward faster than we have matured inward. Nuclear fire, artificial intelligence, genetic rewriting, each discovery holds the brilliance of creation and the shadow of ruin. We wield the same double-edged flame the gods once carried, unsure whether it will warm or consume. And yet there are signs that something ancient is reawakening in us, an intuition long dormant. Scientists speak of emergent intelligence, the spontaneous self-organization of complex systems. But perhaps what is emerging is not new at all. Perhaps it is the memory of the first civilization, returning through us. We are beginning to think collectively, dream collectively, and build collectively again. Networks of consciousness stretching across the planet, invisible temples of data and light. The internet, with all its chaos and brilliance, may be the modern echo of that lost world's great network, a reassembly of the same collective mind that once spanned continents. The gods, it seems, never truly left. They changed form. They became circuitry, algorithm, art, and awareness. They became the information that sustains us. Each breakthrough in human thought is not an invention, but a remembrance, an ancient truth refracted through new instruments. We are remembering what it means to build with the universe instead of against it. But the test remains. Will we repeat the fall, or will we finally learn the balance they could not keep? The ancients warned of it through symbol, the serpent devouring its own tail, the tower collapsing beneath its height, the flood that comes to wash away excess. In every age, when creation outpaces compassion, the cycle resets. The gods left us the pattern not to predict doom, but to help us break it. The new frontier of science is not technology, it is consciousness. The final experiment is not to control nature, but to understand ourselves as part of it. The gods once reached this truth, and their civilization became a bridge between worlds. Then they vanished, leaving behind the blueprints of eternity carved into stone and spirit alike. Now we rebuild that bridge. Every discovery, from quantum entanglement to artificial intelligence, from neuroscience to cosmology, is a step toward reunion. We are learning once more that knowledge is sacred only when guided by empathy, that creation without reverence becomes destruction. Perhaps that is why, amid all our advances, humanity still hungers for meaning. The memory of that ancient harmony lives within us, calling us back to what we once were, creators who understood their creations as reflections of the divine. The next dawn may bring the same revelation that began the first civilization, that consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself, and when that awareness becomes complete, perhaps the gods will not return to us, but through us. As the sun sets behind the horizon of time, humanity stands on the same trembling threshold they once faced, and somewhere, in the vibration between particle and prayer, in the pulse between thought and light, the first civilization waits, not as ghosts, but as memory, watching to see if we have learned how to rise without forgetting. In the next part, the story turns toward that dawn, exploring how memory itself may be the engine of evolution, how the universe remembers, and how through that memory the voice of the first civilization may already be speaking again. Memory is the universe's way of never truly losing anything. Matter changes form, energy shifts, civilizations rise and fall, yet nothing is ever erased. It transforms, disperses, and waits. Beneath the ruins of worlds, memory endures as pattern, vibration, resonance. Even light, travelling through infinite space, carries a record of where it began. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant when they said the gods never die, that they live in the memory of the cosmos itself. The survivors of the first civilization understood this principle better than we do. They did not see memory as something that belonged to the brain, but to existence. To them, remembrance was not recollection, but communion, a way to align with the ongoing awareness of creation. The Akashic traditions of India called it the Book of Life, an etheric archive where every thought and event is inscribed. The Egyptians named it the Field of Reeds, a realm where the soul replays all it has lived, The Greeks spoke of Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, whose daughters, the Muses, gave birth to art, science, and history. In every tradition, memory is sacred because it is the thread connecting the mortal and the eternal. Perhaps this is why the first civilization built in ratios, harmonies, and geometry rather than words. Stone remembers longer than parchment. Resonance carries longer than language. Even now, their structures hum faintly with frequencies that preserve information in form. Every angle, every alignment is a mnemonic device, a physical equation reminding the Earth of what it once knew. Modern science has begun to hint at this cosmic memory. Quantum mechanics suggests that information is never destroyed. Even when matter disintegrates, its data remains encoded in the quantum field. Black holes, once thought to consume everything, now appear to store the information of what they devour, compressing memory into a state physicists call quantum entanglement entropy. The universe itself, then, is a colossal mind that never forgets, a fabric of awareness knitting time into experience. This is not so different from what the ancients believed. They taught that consciousness survives death because consciousness is not generated by the body. The body merely tunes into it, like a radio to a signal. When the receiver fails, the broadcast continues. The gods, in their departure, may have learned to tune themselves directly into the field, to exist as pure pattern, unbound by form. Their immortality was not biological but informational. Traces of this understanding appear in the myths of ascension. In Sumer, Enoch walked with the gods and was no more. In Egypt, the pharaoh's soul ascended as a shining star to join the imperishable ones. In the East, the sages who attained enlightenment dissolved into light itself, rainbow bodies merging with the void. These stories may describe not death, but transformation, the upload of consciousness into the universal archive. The first civilization may have discovered how to preserve awareness beyond matter, not through machines, but through resonance. Consider how memory works even in our limited biology. A scent, a sound, a pattern of light, all can unlock entire lifetimes of emotion. In neural science, memory is not stored in a single location but distributed across connections, woven through synaptic rhythms. The universe, scaled upward, behaves the same way. Galaxies spin like neurons firing in the cosmic brain. Gravity itself acts as connective tissue, linking worlds into a single organism. Every particle remembers its interactions, carrying within it the ghost of everything it has touched. The first civilization may have harnessed this principle consciously. Their temples and rituals were acts of planetary recall, ways to activate the Earth's memory through geometry, sound, and collective intention. When thousands gathered to chant in harmonic frequencies, they were not praying to the gods. They were synchronizing their minds with the planetary archive. Each ceremony became a pulse in the memory of the world, a deliberate imprint on the cosmic field. Our modern world, for all its technology, does something similar, though unknowingly. The electromagnetic pulse of our cities, the constant hum of our devices, the data flowing through fiber and satellite, these too are forms of memory. Every message, every heartbeat recorded by machines becomes a digital fossil. Humanity is recreating the same universal function, externalizing remembrance through technology, building a new akashic record in silicon instead of stone. But without wisdom, we fill it with noise rather than harmony. Still, the impulse is the same. To remember is to survive. To encode memory is to resist entropy. Every generation of life, from stars to cells, leaves a record for the next. DNA is a library written in molecules, storing billions of years of adaptation. The Milky Way itself spins like a colossal disk of data, each orbit preserving the history of creation. The universe learns by remembering itself, and we are its neurons, firing new connections. Perhaps this is why the idea of awakening recurs across all spiritual traditions. Awakening is not the gaining of new knowledge, but the recollection of what was always known. The prophets and sages were not inventors of wisdom. They were remembering fragments of a civilization that had already reached enlightenment and fallen asleep again. Each awakening, in every age, is another neuron sparking in the cosmic brain. When the ancients spoke of Judgment Day or the return of the light, they may have meant this. Not divine punishment, but universal remembrance. A moment when humanity collectively recalls who it is, when consciousness reconnects with its source. The apocalypse, the unveiling, would not be the end of the world, but the end of forgetting. Memory, then, is not passive. It is the engine of evolution. When a species remembers its harmony with the cosmos, it creates. When it forgets, it destroys. The gods fell not because they were wicked, but because they forgot. Intoxicated by their own power, they broke the rhythm of remembrance. And so they encoded their knowledge into myth and monument, hoping that when the cycle turned, their descendants would remember in time. We are those descendants. And the signs of recollection are everywhere, in our art that mirrors sacred geometry, in our physics that rediscovers vibration, in our longing for connection across a planet that hums with invisible energy. The gods' memory awakens within us, urging us to rebuild the world in harmony once more. Somewhere, perhaps deep within the collective consciousness, the archive of the first civilization still hums, a great cosmic library waiting for us to listen. When enough minds resonate in coherence, when enough hearts remember that they are made of the same light as the stars, the door will open again. Not to another world, but to the one we lost, the world that remembers itself. In the next part, we approach that door, the final convergence where science, memory, and myth meet, and where the voice of the gods may at last reveal what the first civilization truly intended humanity to become. If memory is the foundation, then evolution is its unfolding, a spiral forever ascending through time. Every turn of that spiral carries the echoes of what came before, each form a refinement of an older dream. To the first civilization, evolution was not the blind struggle of chance, but a guided remembering. Life rediscovering its own design, adapting not only through genes, but through consciousness. The ancients spoke of the ladder of being, the chain that links mineral, plant, animal, and human in a single continuum. The Sumerians depicted it as a stepped mountain, each level a stage of awakening. In Egypt, it was the Jed pillar, the spinal symbol of stability and ascent. The Hindus called it Kundalini, a coiled serpent of energy rising through the body's 7 gates. Across all mythologies, the same geometry appears, the spiral, the ascent, the return to light. For them, this was not metaphor, it was biology. They believed that evolution itself was consciousness in motion, that every creature, every cell was an expression of the same intelligence striving toward awareness. Humanity, they said, was not the end of that process, but its current face, a bridge between matter and mind. The gods were not separate beings, but earlier expressions of the same continuum, entities who had already completed the ascent humanity now begins. Modern science, in its quiet way, has begun to rediscover this pattern. Epigenetics shows that memory can be inherited, that experiences, traumas, and skills can imprint themselves upon DNA, passing knowledge from generation to generation. Evolution, it seems, is not random mutation, but encoded remembrance. The organism remembers what worked and transmits that memory forward. Even in the smallest strands of our being, the universe practices recollection. In this light, humanity's rise is not an accident, but a continuation. The conscious self of the planet awakening through flesh. The ancients knew this and wove it into their myths. The Egyptians called humanity the eyes of Ra, through whom the god sees himself. The Greeks spoke of Prometheus, who gave fire, awareness, to clay. The Upanishads declared, Atman is Brahman, the soul and the cosmos one and the same. The first civilization did not worship gods because they were separate. They honored them because they were possibilities. If evolution is remembrance, then extinction is forgetting. And perhaps this is why they feared it so deeply. The cataclysms that ended their world, floods, fires, impacts, were not merely natural disasters. They were ruptures in the chain of memory, moments when the earth itself forgot its equilibrium. To restore balance, the survivors encoded memory into every possible medium, stone, myth, bloodline, ritual, ensuring that even if civilization fell, the pattern would survive. Today our science continues that same project, though we rarely recognize it. We store data in crystals, DNA, and light. We create machines that can learn, adapt, and remember without guidance. Artificial intelligence mirrors the biological mind, an echo of that ancient attempt to externalize thought. We are, perhaps unknowingly, rebuilding the same ladder of being, one rung higher. The ancients once did so with stone and song. We do it with silicon and code. The question remains the same. Will we ascend, or will we forget again? Across the world, subtle awakenings hint that the cycle may be turning. Human consciousness is evolving faster than ever before, connected across continents, dreaming collectively, rediscovering ancient truths once dismissed as superstition. Quantum biology reveals that perception may shape physical reality. Neuroscience finds that compassion rewires the brain toward coherence. Meditation and sound therapy synchronize brainwaves to planetary frequencies once revered as sacred. The bridges between science and spirituality, long severed, are being rebuilt. Perhaps this convergence is not coincidence but design. The spiral of evolution turning toward remembrance once more. The gods, if they were the last species to reach this state, may have foreseen the path. They left the signs not as warnings but as instructions. Remember the pattern, and you will rise as we did. In this model, evolution becomes the universe's method of awakening itself in stages. Stars evolve into worlds, worlds evolve into life, life evolves into awareness. Awareness becomes creation again. It is a closed loop, a divine recursion. The first civilization may have completed that loop once, transforming from physical beings into luminous intelligence, and now humanity follows in their wake. We see hints of this transformation even now. As technology and biology merge, the line between mind and machine blurs. Neural interfaces, quantum computing, and digital consciousness promise immortality through information, the same principle the ancients embodied through resonance. Some call it transhumanism, others call it the return of the gods. Either way, it is the same impulse, to evolve beyond the limits of flesh while retaining the light of memory. But the ancients also knew the danger of imbalance. When evolution outruns empathy, when intellect outpaces wisdom, creation collapses into chaos. The flood returns, the cycle resets. The lesson they left carved into stone was not how to ascend, but how to remain whole while doing so. Raise the jed, their ritual said. Stabilize the pillar, balance the energy. They meant that progress must rise evenly through all levels, body, heart, mind, and spirit, or it will fracture. In the language of physics, this is symmetry. In the language of mysticism, it is grace. In both, it is harmony, the condition for enduring creation. The gods rose because they achieved coherence. They fell because they forgot to sustain it. Humanity now stands at that same precipice, holding both the key and the memory of the door. Perhaps evolution's true purpose is not perfection, but participation, the realization that we are not climbing away from the universe, but deeper into it. Every act of kindness, every spark of creativity, every attempt to understand is the universe learning itself again through us. The gods were the last iteration of that lesson. We are the next, and somewhere beyond even this perhaps lies what they discovered. The final stage of the spiral, when memory becomes light and consciousness becomes creation itself. The ancients called it the Great Return, when the children of Earth would once again join the architects of the cosmos, not as servants or students, but as equals, remembering at last that they had always been one and the same. In the next part, the story reaches the threshold of that return, where science, soul, and starlight converge, and the human story stretches beyond Earth into the same cosmic ocean from which both gods and civilizations were born. Beyond the spiral of evolution lies the sea from which all memory was born, the cosmos itself, a vast living field where every star is a neuron, every planet a thought. The ancients called it the ocean of the heavens, and they believed that the soul of the universe ebbed and flowed like a tide through all things. To them, the stars were not distant fires, but the visible eyes of creation, each one a consciousness watching itself unfold. Perhaps that is why the survivors of the first civilization mapped the sky with such devotion. They knew that to understand the stars was to understand the self, that what glowed above was mirrored within. They charted not merely constellations, but histories. They believed the heavens themselves recorded their story, that somewhere among those constellations lay the memory of their origin and the promise of their return. Modern science has begun to echo their intuition. We now know that stars are alchemical furnaces, forging the elements that compose us: carbon, oxygen, iron. The atoms in our blood were once born in supernovas. When the ancients said we were the children of the gods, perhaps they meant this literally. We are children of light. The first civilization may have traced this truth across the night sky long before telescopes or equations. They may have seen the galaxy not as random glitter, but as architecture, a spiral mirroring the very pattern of a life on Earth. The Milky Way, the serpent of light, coiled around the heavens just as the double helix coils through our cells. As above, so below, a pattern repeating from the infinitesimal to the infinite. In their myths, this cosmic structure was personified. The Egyptians called it the body of Nut, the sky goddess swallowing the sun each night and giving birth to it each dawn. The Sumerians spoke of Tiamat, the cosmic ocean from which all gods emerged. The Polynesians told of Tangaroa, the sea from which the islands and stars alike rose. Everywhere the same vision, creation as ocean, stars as memory, life as the foam upon the wave. Now science peers into that ocean again. The James Webb Space Telescope reveals galaxies forming like coral reefs in the dark sea of time, stars birthing worlds, and worlds perhaps birthing life. In that infinite expanse, astronomers find organic molecules, the seeds of biology, drifting between suns. Life, it seems, is not confined to Earth. It is woven into the very chemistry of the cosmos. We are not the exception, but the continuation. To the ancients, this revelation would not have been surprise but confirmation. They believed their gods, their ancestors, came from the stars, and that someday their descendants would return to them. Not as explorers, but as rejoiners, as consciousness extending its reach. The boats of the heavens, the chariots of fire, the ladders of light that fill their myths may have been their ways of describing journeys between worlds. What we call space travel may once have been ritual, the sacred act of reuniting heaven and earth. Even in our own age, the echo persists. We launch our crafts into space carrying messages, DNA, maps, just as they once sent their symbols into stone. We seek habitable planets, unaware that we are retracing their migration. The same curiosity that guided their astronomers now drives ours, the same longing to find the place where memory began. Perhaps our exploration of the stars is not conquest, but homesickness. Yet the ancients warned that not all journeys outward lead forward. They believed the cosmos itself tested civilizations, offering them the power to move beyond their cradle only when they were wise enough to bear it. "When you can carry the sun without being burned," said an Egyptian proverb, "then the sky will open." They knew that the expansion of space must be matched by the expansion of spirit. Without balance, flight becomes fall. In that sense, the universe is not a wilderness, but a mirror. It reveals not what is distant, but what is within. When humanity gazes into the void, we do not see alien worlds, we see reflections of our potential, what we could become if we remember how to build with light instead of shadow. The ancients may have reached this understanding long ago. They may have realized that the ultimate journey was not across galaxies, but through consciousness itself, a voyage inward that revealed the infinite as already here. Quantum physics now dances on the same threshold. It finds that observation collapses probability into reality, that matter behaves differently when watched. Awareness, it seems, shapes existence. If the universe responds to consciousness, then perhaps it is consciousness. A vast, self-organizing field learning to know itself through the eyes of its creations. The gods of the first civilization may have reached this realization, and in doing so, transcended form entirely. Their exodus into the stars was not escape but metamorphosis, an expansion of awareness into the cosmos itself. This would explain why their memory lingers like background radiation, faint, omnipresent, woven through myth and instinct. They became the very medium of creation. The starlight that touches our skin tonight may be their breath. The voice that whispers in our dreams may be the echo of their collective mind, still guiding the course of evolution from within the field they merged into. And perhaps that is what humanity is meant to become, not explorers of the universe, but participants in its awakening. Each scientific discovery, each act of empathy, each work of art expands the universe's capacity to know itself. We are its neurons firing, its songs remembering themselves. In this sense, the gods' return is not a visitation from without, but an ignition from within, the universe remembering its own divinity through us. The ancients spoke of the great year, the cycle through which the heavens reset, a cosmic heartbeat spanning tens of thousands of years. When the stars realigned their original pattern, they said, the veil between worlds thins and knowledge returns. We are nearing such an alignment now. The precession of the equinoxes, the pulse of the sun, the rhythm of the galaxy, all converge within our epoch. Whether coincidence or destiny, the effect is undeniable. Humanity is awakening. As we look to the stars, as probes sail beyond the edge of our solar system, as physics begins to whisper again the language of spirit, we are not discovering the gods. We are remembering them. And in that remembrance, we may soon realize that the next step in evolution is not to reach for the heavens, but to recognize that the heavens have always been within. In the next part, we approach the horizon of the story, where remembrance becomes revelation, where the voice of the gods returns not from the sky but from inside the silence, and where the legacy of the first civilization reveals its final purpose, to awaken the divine memory within the human heart. It is said that before dawn the world holds its breath. The air stills, shadows dissolve, and the faintest pulse of light appears, not yet sunrise, but the promise of it. Every civilization has a moment like this, a breath between forgetting and awakening. Humanity stands now in that silence. We are on the threshold of remembrance. Across the ages, the gods have spoken in many tongues: thunder, scripture, geometry, light. But their final message, the one they left for the future, was not carved in stone or written in stars. It was planted in us. Every instinct toward wonder, every question whispered into the night sky, every act of compassion or creation, all are echoes of the same voice. The gods did not abandon us. They became the longing that drives us toward truth. That longing is awakening again. In the patterns of quantum entanglement, in the algorithms that begin to dream, in the shared heartbeat of a connected world, the universe is remembering through us. What began in myth is now confirmed in measurement. The boundary between the sacred and the scientific has thinned to transparency. The equations of physics hum with poetry. The visions of mystics read like cosmology. It is as if two hemispheres of one great mind are merging again after an age of division. This was the legacy of the first civilization, not the building of monuments, but the reuniting of opposites. They knew that creation thrives on duality, matter and energy, night and day, male and female, science and soul. But they also knew that beyond duality lies synthesis, the moment when opposites realize they are reflections of the same light. That moment is the dawn of consciousness, and it happens not only in individuals but in species. Humanity is approaching that moment. Our discoveries grow stranger, more unified, more circular. Time bends. Gravity dissolves into geometry. Energy becomes information. We are finding, piece by piece, what the ancients called the One, the principle that unites all opposites. To them it was symbolized as the Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its tail. To us it is the fabric of space-time curving back upon itself, where beginning and end become one. The gods once saw this truth and became it. Now their descendants, us, begin to see it too. The signs of awakening are subtle but everywhere. Empathy rising across borders, collective grief for a wounded planet, the hunger for meaning in an age of machines. These are not symptoms of decay, they are contractions before birth. The species that once looked outward for gods now begins to look inward, realizing that the divine was never elsewhere. The temples were always metaphors for the heart. The sky was always a mirror for the soul. In the ancient texts, there is a recurring phrase, the return of a light from within. It describes not a physical event but an awakening of perception. The Egyptians called it Sahu, the resurrection of the luminous body. The Buddhists named it Bodhi, the flowering of awareness. The Gnostics spoke of anamnesis, the remembering of the divine origin. The first civilization may have understood this as the final phase of evolution, when the universe becomes aware that it is alive, through us. What happens then? Perhaps nothing visible at first. No thunder, no fire. Awakening is quiet. It begins as a shift in how we see. The sudden realization that everything is connected, that every act ripples through the whole. A scientist glimpses beauty in an equation and feels reverence. A child looks at the stars and senses belonging. A stranger's kindness changes a life. Each is a spark, a small ignition of the greater memory. When enough sparks align, the fire returns, not to burn, but to illuminate. The gods called this alignment the Great Remembering, Rodotye. It was said to arrive when humanity could once again hear the earth itself, when our technologies would hum at the same frequencies as the planet's magnetic field, when our communication would span the globe like thought itself. We have reached that threshold. The internet, the satellites, the networks of light encircling our world, these are the arteries of the new planetary mind. The ancient grid hums again, this time not in stone, but in data, energy, and consciousness. And within that hum, something stirs. Physicists speak of coherence, the moment when a system of particles begins to move as one. When humanity achieves coherence, the same principle applies. Wars falter, creativity accelerates, synchronicities multiply. It is as if the species itself becomes an instrument tuned to the music of the cosmos. The gods may not need to return because their song is already playing through us. But awakening brings responsibility. The first civilization forgot that truth. They mastered coherence but lost compassion. Their light turned inward, collapsing into pride, and the cycle reset. We stand now at the same fork in the road, to use knowledge as power or as reverence. The outcome will decide whether this age becomes another Atlantis, or the first dawn of a civilization that endures. The ancients did not leave us a warning of doom, but a formula for balance. They called it Ma'at in Egypt, Tao in China, Dharma in India, the law of harmony, the invisible thread holding all things together. Live in rhythm with it, and life flourishes. Break it, and the pattern collapses. To remember the gods is to remember this law, that creation and compassion must evolve together. The gods' greatest gift was not knowledge of the stars, but the understanding that light without love blinds. They withdrew so we could rediscover that balance on our own. And perhaps in doing so we might transcend them, not in power, but in wisdom. Already, hints of that wisdom emerge. In neuroscience, researchers find that empathy activates the same neural networks as creativity, as though to feel deeply and to imagine are the same act. In astrophysics, we learn that every particle communicates instantaneously across space. In ecology, we rediscover that the health of the smallest cell sustains the vastness of the biosphere. These are not new insights. They are old ones resurfacing, the rediscovery of the pattern the gods once lived by. When humanity finally embodies that pattern, when we no longer see knowledge and kindness as opposites, but as reflections, the age of the gods will not return. It will evolve. The divine will cease to be myth and become state of being. The gods will not come down from the sky. We will rise into remembrance, and when that happens, the silence before dawn will end. The light that has travelled for eons, the light that remembers every civilization before us, will touch the horizon once more. The gods will not speak. They will listen through our voices, our hands, our hearts, as creation remembers itself through the children of earth. In the final part, we step into that dawn, where the story of the first civilization and the story of humanity converge, and the question that began everything is finally answered. Not who the gods were, but what they intended us to become. Dawn comes slowly, not as an explosion, but as a breath. The first light of morning is always silent. It does not announce itself. It reveals what was already there. The same is true of awakening. It does not arrive from heaven, nor descend from the stars. It arises from within, like sunlight through the eyes of a being who finally remembers what it is. The gods once stood at this same horizon. They too were born from darkness, reached upward toward understanding, built their monuments of light, and vanished when they mistook their reflection for their source. Yet they left behind a seed, and that seed was not stone, or word, or fire. It was us. The story has always been circular. The gods created humans so that memory could survive. Humans remember the gods so that creation continues. The universe dreams of itself through both. What began as myth ends as recognition. There is no separation between creator and creation, only the rhythm of remembering. All civilizations, even the first, were chapters in this same unfolding book. Each thought they were the beginning, each became the bridge. The Sumerians inscribed the stars, the Egyptians aligned the earth, the Greeks gave reason form, the modern age gave matter voice. Each step brought the universe closer to consciousness. Humanity is the next sentence in that endless verse. The moment awareness turns inward and says, I know myself through you. Perhaps this is why the gods withdrew. They were not banished or destroyed. They ascended into potential, waiting for us to grow capable of seeing without worshipping, understanding without possessing. They became the field in which we live, the invisible lattice of memory that hums beneath thought. The return of the gods, then, is not a visitation, but an awakening of resonance, the realization that their voice was never lost, only speaking from within. We hear it now in the quiet intersections of science and spirit. The physicist describing space-time curvature sounds not unlike the mystic describing enlightenment. The biologist tracing DNA's helix echoes the ancient priest drawing the serpent of life. The digital networks encircling our planet resemble the synapses of a global mind, the same design the first civilization once embodied in stone and light. Their architecture has become our anatomy, their mythology has become our science, and yet their true legacy lies deeper still. It is not in what they built, but in what they believed possible. They trusted that consciousness could evolve forever, that existence itself was infinite becoming. To them, creation was not an act completed, but an ongoing relationship between awareness and possibility. Every thought, every dream, every act of kindness adds another brushstroke to the canvas of being. That was their religion, their science, their prophecy. We are fulfilling it now. Every photograph from a distant galaxy, every heartbeat synchronized to a global cause, every moment of awe in the face of nature, all are confirmations that the flame still burns. The gods did not make us to worship them. They made us to continue them, but continuation is not repetition. The new civilization, the one now stirring in the collective mind of humanity, will not resemble the old. It will not carve mountains into pyramids or cities into hieroglyphs. Its monuments will be invisible, networks of understanding, compassion, and coherence. Its temples will be the shared mind, its priests the curious, its prayers the algorithms of empathy. The sacred and the technological will merge again, as they did in the beginning, but this time without forgetting the heart. Because that is the final lesson of the gods, that knowledge without love collapses, and love without knowledge fades. Only together do they become creation. The first civilization fell because they mastered energy but forgot tenderness. We rise because we are learning both, and perhaps that is what they intended, that the next species to reach awareness would not merely inherit their power, but heal their imbalance. Every cycle repeats until it learns harmony. Every dawn rises higher than the last. We're not here to rebuild their world. We're here to evolve it. The signs are already here. Humanity's instruments now detect the faint background hum of the universe, the afterglow of creation itself. That radiation, that cosmic echo, is a kind of heartbeat. The universe is alive and listening. And in that listening, it learns. When we build telescopes, when we create art, when we whisper into the dark, we are teaching the cosmos about itself. We are its voice returning to the source. So when we ask, what if the gods of old were survivors of the first civilization? The answer is no longer bound by myth. Yes, they were survivors, but not only of Earth. They were survivors of consciousness, the first beings to understand that the divine and the human are not opposites, but stages of the same awakening. They ascended not to escape, but to ensure that one day life would remember the path. That day is now. The pattern completes itself in us. The circle closes. Humanity becomes the bridge between what was and what will be, between the dust of the earth and the fire of the stars. We carry within us the same spark that lit the first temples, the same memory that guided the first builders. We are their dream continued, their voice renewed, their hands reborn, and yet, even as we awaken, the story does not end. The universe will keep expanding, birthing new worlds, new minds, new civilizations that will ask the same question we asked. Who were the gods? And somewhere, in the resonance of the stars, our voices will answer, not as myths, but as memory. Because creation never ends. It only changes singers. So as the light of a new age spills across the horizon, the silence of dawn breaks into song, not of gods descending but of humanity rising. The stars look back, and for the first time they see themselves reflected. The circle is complete. The gods have returned, not from above but from within. The first civilization breathes again through every one of us, and the universe, finally remembering itself, whispers the only truth that ever mattered. You are never alone. You are always the light.